Andrew and Paula Keene's love story began like many others in Pinewood, at the annual Harvest Festival 15 years earlier. Andrew, then a shy graduate student, had volunteered to run the physics demonstration booth. Paula, home from college for the weekend, found herself captivated by his passionate explanation of physics. Their courtship was a whirlwind of outdoor adventures and cozy evenings, discussing their dreams for the future. Paula was drawn to Andrew's quiet intensity and brilliant mind, while Andrew was in awe of Paula's confidence and zest for life. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony by Pinewood Lake, their vows echoing off the surrounding mountains as friends and family cheered. The early years of their marriage were filled with the joy of building a life together. They bought a charming craftsman-style home on Maple Street, its wrap-around porch soon cluttered with Paula's collection of potted herbs and Andrew's telescope. Weekends were spent hiking the nearby trails or hosting game nights with their growing circle of friends. To the outside world, the Keenes appeared to be the perfect couple, supportive, affectionate, and deeply in sync. But as time passed, small fissures began to appear in their relationship. Paula's career in marketing took off, bringing with it late nights at the office and frequent business trips. Andrew, content with his position as a high school teacher, struggled to understand his wife's drive for professional success. He began to feel left behind, his world shrinking as Paula's expanded. Their conversations, once flowing freely, became stilted and superficial. Paula found herself frustrated by Andrew's reluctance to try new experiences or socialize outside their established routines. Andrew, in turn, felt increasingly inadequate in the face of Paula's vibrant social life and career achievements. Attempts to rekindle their connection often fell flat. A romantic getaway to the Oregon coast ended in tense silence as they realized how little they now had in common. Date nights became an exercise in checking boxes rather than genuinely connecting. Even their physical intimacy waned, with both making excuses to avoid the awkwardness of forced passion. It was in this fragile state that Paula Keene first crossed paths with David Reeves, setting in motion a chain of events that would shatter the delicate equilibrium of their marriage and lead to consequences neither could have imagined. The seeds of Paula and David's affair were planted on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the Pinewood Business Association mixer. Paula, representing her marketing firm, found herself drawn to the charismatic newcomer who spoke passionately about revitalizing the town's visual branding. David's enthusiasm was infectious, and Paula soon realized an hour had passed in what felt like minutes. Over the following weeks, their paths continued to cross professionally. Paula's firm hired David for a series of projects, necessitating frequent meetings and collaboration. What began as a working relationship quickly evolved into a friendship, with shared lunches extending well beyond the allotted hour as they discovered a mutual love for contemporary art and obscure indie films. Paula found herself looking forward to their interactions, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. David's attentiveness and genuine interest in her thoughts made her feel seen in a way she had long forgotten. For his part, David was captivated by Paula's quick wit and the passion that shone through when she spoke about her work. The line between professional and personal blurred one evening after a particularly successful presentation to a client. Flush with victory, Paula and David decided to celebrate with drinks at a bar on the outskirts of town. As the night wore on and inhibitions lowered, their conversation turned more intimate. David's hand brushed against Paula's, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. It was Paula who made the first move, leaning in to kiss David as they stood in the parking lot. The kiss, fueled by alcohol and long-suppressed desire, quickly deepened. Their first clandestine rendezvous took place at a small bed and breakfast in the next town over. As they fell into each other's arms, all thoughts of consequences faded away. In the afterglow, tangled in rumpled sheets, Paula and David convinced themselves that what they had found was too precious to give up, and so began a careful dance of stolen moments and secret meetings, each rendezvous adding another layer to the web of deceit that would ultimately ensnare them all. For months, Andrew Keene remained blissfully unaware of his wife's infidelity. He attributed Paula's improved mood and renewed energy to a positive shift in her work life. However, as winter gave way to spring, small inconsistencies began to gnaw at the edges of his consciousness. It started with little things: Paula's sudden interest in obscure bands she'd never mentioned before, hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered the room, and an inexplicable nervousness whenever plans changed unexpectedly. Andrew initially dismissed these observations, not wanting to acknowledge the growing unease in the pit of his stomach. The pivotal moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Paula had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and as Andrew reached past it to grab a mug, a notification flashed across the screen. The message preview from an unsaved number read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last time was..." Andrew's hand froze mid-air. He knew he shouldn't look, that doing so would violate Paula's privacy. But the seed of suspicion, once planted, grew rapidly. With trembling fingers, he opened the message thread. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Months of intimate exchanges, thinly veiled references to secret meetings, and declarations of passion scrolled before his eyes. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when he saw a photo David had sent. Nauseated and shaking, Andrew closed the laptop and retreated to the basement, his mind reeling. When Paula returned home that evening, she found him sitting in the dark, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. The confrontation that followed was brutal in its rawness. Paula, caught off guard, initially tried to deny everything, but faced with the evidence Andrew had discovered, she finally broke down and confessed to the affair. As Paula sobbed and attempted to explain, Andrew listened in stony silence. When she finished, he stood up and walked out of the room without a word, leaving Paula alone with the wreckage of their marriage strewn around her. In the days following his devastating discovery, Andrew Keene surprised everyone with his apparent, calm acceptance of the situation. When Paula, racked with guilt, offered to move out, Andrew insisted she stay. He spoke of forgiveness, of working through their issues together, and of his enduring love for her despite her transgression. Paula, overwhelmed with relief at this unexpected reprieve, threw herself into rebuilding their relationship. She ended things with David in a terse phone call, blocking his number and social media accounts. She suggested couples therapy, date nights, and even a second honeymoon to rekindle their connection. To their friends and colleagues, the Keenes presented a united front. They were seen holding hands at the farmers' market, laughing together at local events, and Andrew even surprised Paula with flowers at her office. Many in Pinewood commented on how the couple seemed stronger than ever, admiring their ability to weather such a storm. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, a very different reality was unfolding. Andrew's forgiveness was a masterful performance, concealing a heart twisted by betrayal and a mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. Each gentle word and loving gesture was calculated, designed to lull Paula into a false sense of security while he grappled with his growing obsession. Late at night, while Paula slept, Andrew would lie awake, his mind replaying imagined scenes of his wife in David's arms. He began keeping a journal, filling pages with dark musings and elaborate fantasies of confronting his wife's lover. The act of writing these thoughts became a pressure valve, allowing him to maintain his cool exterior. While his inner turmoil intensified, Paula, eager to believe in their reconciliation, overlooked the subtle signs of Andrew's internal struggle. As weeks turned into months, the charade became second nature to Andrew. He played the role of the forgiving husband with chilling precision, all while his resentment festered and grew. He began to view his performance as a cosmic joke, taking a perverse pleasure in how easily everyone, especially Paula, bought into the illusion. As summer faded into autumn, Andrew Keene's carefully maintained facade began to crack under the weight of his growing obsession. At school, Andrew found himself unable to focus on his lessons, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Paula and David together. He snapped at students for minor infractions, his usual patience evaporating like morning dew. Colleagues noticed the change, whispering concerns about his erratic behavior in the teacher's lounge. As his jealousy deepened, Andrew's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed a hidden GPS tracker on Paula's car, justifying the invasion of privacy as necessary to ease his fears. Late at night, he would pore over her location data, constructing elaborate scenarios to explain any deviation from her usual routes. Andrew's once diverse interests narrowed to a singular focus, monitoring Paula and by extension David. He created fake social media accounts to follow David online, scrutinizing every post and interaction for any hint of continued contact with Paula. Hours were spent driving past David's apartment and office, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything to confirm his suspicions. The turning point came on an October evening. Andrew, having convinced himself that Paula was meeting David after work, followed her to a small art gallery downtown. As he watched from across the street, he saw Paula emerge from the gallery, laughing and chatting with a group of colleagues. There was no sign of David. In that moment, something inside Andrew snapped. The realization that his suspicions were unfounded did nothing to quell the rage and humiliation that had been building for months. Sitting in his car watching Paula drive away, Andrew made a decision. If reality wouldn't conform to his suspicions, he would force it to do so. He would create a situation that would justify his jealousy, his anger, and ultimately, the retribution he now craved. The location was his first major decision. Andrew knew the crime scene needed to be isolated enough to avoid witnesses, but not so remote as to arouse suspicion. After careful consideration, he settled on an abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of town. The dilapidated building, slated for demolition in the coming year, offered both privacy and multiple access points. Next came the question of method. Andrew wanted something that would be difficult to trace back to him, ruling out firearms or any weapon he would need to purchase. After much deliberation, he decided on a garrote, silent, effective, and easily made from household materials. Piece by piece, Andrew accumulated the necessary supplies. He bought lengths of wire from different hardware stores across the county, paying cash each time. Gloves, bleach, and other cleaning supplies were added to regular shopping trips in small quantities to avoid arousing suspicion. He crafted a fake email account under the guise of a local arts organization. He composed a message to David, inviting him to participate in a secretive art installation project at the mill. The email emphasized the need for discretion, explaining that the project was meant to be a surprise for the community. Andrew knew that David's ego and artistic ambitions would make such an offer irresistible. As he waited for David to take the bait, Andrew fine-tuned the details of his plan. He meticulously cleaned his car, removing any traces of hair or fibers that could later implicate him. He purchased a burner phone with cash from a convenience store 2 towns over, using it to communicate with David under the guise of the arts organization coordinator. The night before the planned meeting, Andrew made a final visit to the lumber mill. He cleared a path through the debris, ensuring he would have a clean line of sight from his hiding spot to the entrance. With gloved hands, he positioned the garrote wire behind a stack of rotting pallets, ready to be grabbed at a moment's notice. As he stood in the musty darkness of the mill, the reality of what he was about to do finally hit Andrew. With grim determination, Andrew left the mill and drove home, knowing that the next time he returned it would be to commit murder. Andrew Keene went through the motions of his morning routine, kissing Paula goodbye with a casualness that belied the turmoil roiling within him. He taught his classes on autopilot, his mind fixated on the events to come. As the final bell rang, Andrew hurried to his car, his heart pounding. He drove to the lumber mill, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. Parking a quarter-mile away, he donned a pair of nondescript boots he'd purchased for the occasion and made his way to the mill on foot. Inside the dilapidated structure, Andrew positioned himself behind the stack of pallets, the garrote wire coiled in his gloved hands. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each sound from outside sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. At precisely 4:30 p.m., the crunch of tires on gravel announced David's arrival. Andrew held his breath as footsteps approached, echoing in the cavernous space. David's voice called out tentatively, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Andrew remained perfectly still, watching as David moved further into the mill. When David's back was turned, Andrew emerged from his hiding spot, wire at the ready. In 3 quick strides, he was behind David. Before David could fully register the presence behind him, Andrew looped the wire around his throat and pulled tight. David's hands flew up, clawing desperately at the wire cutting into his neck. He thrashed violently, his elbow catching Andrew in the ribs with surprising force. The struggle seemed to last an eternity. Andrew's arms burned with the effort of maintaining his grip as David fought for his life. Gradually, David's movements became weaker, his gasps for air more sporadic. With one final convulsive shudder, David Reeves went limp in Andrew's arms. Andrew held on for several minutes more, ensuring that no life remained in his rival's body. When he finally released his grip, David crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. Panting heavily, Andrew stared down at the lifeless form before him. The reality of what he had done crashed over him in waves. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the stark finality of taking a human life. Moving as if in a trance, Andrew began the process of cleaning up the scene. He collected stray fibers from David's clothing, pocketing them to dispose of later. Using bleach he had stashed earlier, he meticulously cleaned any surfaces he or David might have touched. As the light outside began to fade, Andrew dragged David's body to a pre-dug hole in the far corner of the mill. He covered the shallow grave with debris, knowing that the impending demolition would further conceal his crime. Before leaving, Andrew took one last look around the mill with a mix of horror and grim satisfaction. Andrew realized that he had done it. He had committed the perfect murder. Driving home, Andrew found Paula already there, preparing dinner. He forced himself to act normally, commenting on the meal and asking about her day with casualness. Over the next few days, Andrew was hyper-aware of every news report and passing police car. He scoured local news websites for any mention of David's disappearance, but found nothing. The lack of immediate alarm was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Paula, oblivious to the turmoil beneath her husband's calm exterior, commented on how much more relaxed Andrew seemed lately. She attributed it to their efforts at reconciliation, never suspecting the dark truth behind his changed demeanor. A week after the murder, the first signs of concern about David's whereabouts began to surface. His clients reported missed deadlines and unanswered calls. Friends posted on social media, asking if anyone had heard from him. Andrew watched these developments with a mixture of dread and perverse fascination. When the police finally became involved, Andrew was ready. He had prepared a detailed account of his movements on the day of David's disappearance, complete with fabricated receipts and a meticulously edited digital trail. He even mentioned to Paula in earshot of a neighbor that he hoped that nice graphic designer was okay, establishing an alibi of concern. As the investigation gained momentum, Andrew found himself drawn into the search efforts. He volunteered to help distribute flyers and even organized a search party to comb areas of Pinewood Park. His apparent dedication to finding David threw off any suspicion that might have fallen on him. But beneath his helpful exterior, Andrew was constantly on edge. Every unexpected knock at the door sent his heart racing. He began to have vivid nightmares of David's final moments, waking up drenched in sweat. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a constant, invisible burden that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. As days turned into weeks with no sign of David Reeves, the Pinewood Police Department intensified its investigation. Detective Laura Stewart, a recent transfer from Portland with a reputation for solving cold cases, was assigned to lead the inquiry. Stewart's first step was to retrace David's last known movements. Interviews with his clients and friends painted a picture of a man who had been excited about an upcoming art project, though details were frustratingly vague. Stewart's interest was piqued by mentions of a secretive installation at an undisclosed location. The detective's scrutiny soon turned to David's personal life. It didn't take long for rumors of his affair with Paula Keene to surface. Stewart approached the subject delicately in her interview with Paula, who admitted to the past indiscretion but insisted it had ended months ago. Andrew, present for the interview, played the part of the supportive husband perfectly, expressing sympathy for David's disappearance despite the history. As Stewart dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. David's bank records showed no unusual activity, and his passport remained in his apartment. His car was found parked at his residence, ruling out the possibility that he had simply left town. The more Stewart investigated, the more convinced she became that David had met with foul play. A breakthrough came when a hiker reported finding David's phone in Pinewood Park, miles from his usual haunts. Forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been wiped clean of data, an act that struck Stewart as deliberate and suspicious. With each new piece of evidence, the circle of suspects narrowed. Stewart found herself returning again and again to the Keenes. Paula's affair provided a motive, but her genuine distress seemed authentic. Andrew's alibi was solid, yet something about his too perfect responses nagged at Stewart's instincts. As autumn deepened into winter, the case consumed Detective Stewart. She spent long nights poring over evidence, convinced that the key to unraveling the mystery lay somewhere in the complex web of relationships surrounding David Reeves. Little did she know, the truth was far closer and far more chilling than she could have imagined. The turning point in the investigation came on a frigid December morning, 3 months after David Reeves's disappearance. A team of surveyors, assessing the old lumber mill for demolition, made a grisly discovery. Partially unearthed by recent heavy rains, David's decomposing body was found in a shallow grave. Detective Stewart and her team descended on the scene, meticulously combing the area for evidence. Despite Andrew's careful cleanup, trace evidence remained. Fibers matched to David's clothing were found embedded in the floorboards, and DNA analysis of the soil revealed blood spatter consistent with a violent struggle. The discovery of the body shifted the investigation into high gear. Stewart re-interviewed everyone connected to David, this time with a sharper focus. It was during her second conversation with Andrew Keene that things began to unravel. Stewart noticed subtle inconsistencies in Andrew's story, minor details that didn't quite align with his previous statements. His demeanor, once calmly cooperative, now had an undercurrent of nervousness. When Stewart casually mentioned that they had surveillance footage from near the lumber mill, she saw a flicker of panic cross Andrew's face before he quickly composed himself. That momentary lapse was all Stewart needed. She intensified her questioning, probing deeper into Andrew's alibi for the day of David's disappearance. Under the relentless pressure, Andrew's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a dramatic turn, Andrew broke down and confessed to the murder. He recounted the entire sordid tale, his discovery of the affair, his months of secret planning, and the final fatal confrontation at the lumber mill. As he spoke, it was as if a dam had burst, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in a torrent of words. Paula, brought in for questioning separately, was shattered by the revelation. She struggled to reconcile the loving, forgiving husband she thought she knew with the man capable of such a calculated act of violence. Her world, already fragile from the strain of the affair and its aftermath, collapsed entirely. As news of Andrew's confession spread, the town of Pinewood reeled in shock. The image of the Keenes as the perfect couple, even in the face of adversity, was shattered. Friends and colleagues struggled to understand how they could have missed the signs of Andrew's deteriorating mental state. In the following weeks, more details emerged. His internet search history revealed months of research on undetectable poisons and body disposal methods. The depth of his obsession and the meticulous nature of his planning chilled even the most seasoned detectives. Andrew Keene was charged with first-degree murder. As he awaited trial, psychologists debated whether his actions were the result of temporary insanity or a more deep-seated pathology. Paula, grappling with her own guilt and the traumatic loss of both her lover and her husband, retreated from public life. The case of David Reeves's murder would long be remembered in Pinewood as a tragic reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. It served as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy and the unforeseen consequences of betrayal, forever changing the way the town viewed itself and its inhabitants. Remington Harlow, a successful software engineer, and his wife Cordelia, a talented interior designer, were the picture of marital bliss to their friends and neighbors. Their home, with its manicured lawn and white picket fence, stood as a testament to their seemingly perfect life. But beneath the surface, a dark current was stirring. Remington's growing fascination with a taboo fantasy would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their idyllic existence and end in tragedy. What began as a consensual exploration of desires would spiral into a maelstrom of jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately murder. Remington Harlow was born in 1985 to a middle-class family in Eugene. From an early age, he displayed a keen intellect and a fascination with computers. His parents, both educators, nurtured his interests, and by the time he entered high school, Remington was already coding his own programs. Despite his academic prowess, he struggled socially, often feeling awkward and out of place among his peers. Cordelia Astor, born in 1987, grew up in a wealthy family in Seattle, Washington. The youngest of 3 children, she was vivacious and creative from the start. Her parents, successful real estate developers, provided her with every opportunity, including art classes and interior design courses. Their paths crossed in 2005 at Reed College in Portland. Remington, a junior computer science major, literally bumped into Cordelia, a freshman art student in the campus library. He was immediately smitten by her radiant smile and effortless charm. Cordelia, in turn, found herself drawn to Remington's quiet intensity and brilliant mind. Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discussions, late-night coding sessions, where Cordelia would sketch while Remington typed, and explorations of Portland's eclectic art scene. Despite their different backgrounds and personalities, They found in each other a perfect complement. They married in 2009, shortly after Cordelia's graduation. The wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard in the Willamette Valley, was a joyous affair that seemed to portend a bright future. Remington had already secured a high-paying job at a tech startup in Portland, while Cordelia began to make a name for herself in the city's competitive interior design market. For the first few years of their marriage, life seemed perfect. They bought their dream home in Oak Ridge, traveled the world, and built a wide circle of friends. Remington's career soared as he climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior engineer at a tech firm. Cordelia's design business flourished, with her work featured in several magazines. From the outside, the Harlows appeared to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a strong, loving marriage. But as they entered their 30s, subtle cracks began to form in their seemingly flawless facade, setting the stage for the tumultuous events to come. As the Harlows approached their 10th wedding anniversary, a restlessness began to creep into their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable, but sometimes monotonous glow. Remington, always introspective, found himself increasingly drawn to online forums and discussions about alternative sexual lifestyles. It started innocently enough, a curiosity about what other couples did to spice up their love lives. But as Remington delved deeper into these virtual communities, he became particularly fascinated by the concept of cuckolding. The idea of watching his wife with another man, of being a voyeur to her pleasure, awakened something within him. At first, Remington kept these thoughts to himself, ashamed and confused by the intensity of his desires. He would stay up late, ostensibly working, but in reality, he was consuming every piece of cuckold-related content he could find. Cordelia, perceptive as ever, sensed the change in her husband. She noticed his distraction, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over during their conversations, the increased frequency of his late nights at the computer. Concerned, she gently probed, asking if everything was all right, if work was becoming too stressful. Finally, after weeks of internal struggle, Remington decided to broach the subject with Cordelia. One evening over a bottle of wine, he haltingly confessed his newfound interest. He spoke of his desires, his curiosity about exploring this fantasy, all the while watching Cordelia's face for signs of disgust or rejection. To his surprise and relief, Cordelia didn't recoil. Instead, she listened with an open mind, asking thoughtful questions about what exactly appealed to him about this scenario. While she expressed initial reservations, she also admitted to a certain intrigue. The idea of being desired by another man, of being the center of attention, held its own allure. This conversation marked a turning point in their marriage. What had been a private fantasy for Remington was now out in the open, a possibility to be explored together. Neither of them could have predicted the profound impact this revelation would have on their lives, or the dangerous path it would ultimately lead them down. The Harlows' foray into the world of cuckolding began cautiously. They set ground rules, discussed boundaries, and agreed to take things slowly. But finding the right person to introduce into their marriage proved challenging. They wanted someone attractive and charismatic, but also discreet and respectful of their arrangement. Enter Thaddius Blackwood. Cordelia met him at a charity art auction in downtown Portland. Tall, with piercing green eyes, Thaddius exuded a magnetic charm that drew people to him. As the owner of a successful art gallery, he moved effortlessly through Portland's cultural elite, his wit and knowledge making him the center of attention at any gathering. Cordelia was immediately drawn to Thaddius's sophisticated aura. They spent the evening in animated conversation about emerging artists and the latest trends in interior design. When Thaddius casually mentioned being unattached and open to new experiences, Cordelia felt a spark of excitement. She relayed her encounter to Remington that night, watching his eyes light up as she described Thaddius. They agreed that he might be the perfect candidate for their exploration. Remington encouraged Cordelia to nurture the connection, his excitement palpable. Over the next few weeks, Cordelia and Thaddius met for coffee several times, ostensibly to discuss potential collaborations between his gallery and her design firm. Each time, Cordelia returned home to regale Remington with stories of their encounters, stoking the flames of his fantasy. Finally, after a particularly flirtatious meeting, Cordelia decided it was time to broach the subject with Thaddius. To her surprise and delight, he was intrigued by the proposition. He admitted to having participated in similar arrangements before, and understood the delicacy required. With Thaddius on board, the stage was set for the Harlows to turn fantasy into reality. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would irrevocably change their lives. The night of the first encounter arrived with a mix of nervous energy and excited anticipation. Remington and Cordelia had spent weeks planning every detail, from the ambient lighting in their bedroom to the bottle of expensive champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Thaddius arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, looking dashing in a tailored charcoal suit. He brought with him a bouquet of exotic flowers for Cordelia and a rare bottle of scotch for Remington, a gesture that impressed them both with its thoughtfulness. The evening began in the living room with drinks and light conversation. Thaddius regaled them with stories from the art world, his charisma on full display. Cordelia, dressed in a slinky black dress, laughed at his jokes and touched his arm with increasing frequency. Remington watched from his armchair, a tumbler of scotch in hand, his heart racing with every interaction between his wife and their guest. As the night progressed and the alcohol flowed, the atmosphere grew charged with sexual tension. Finally, with a meaningful look at Remington, Cordelia took Thaddius by the hand and led him upstairs. In the bedroom, Remington settled into a corner armchair as Cordelia and Thaddius began to kiss passionately. When Thaddius and Cordelia finally fell onto the bed, their bodies entwined, Remington felt a potent mix of arousal and an unexpected twinge of jealousy. The encounter itself was intense and passionate. Remington watched, transfixed, as his fantasy played out before his eyes. The reality was more visceral, more overwhelming than he had imagined. Afterwards, as they all lay spent and silent, Remington felt a complex swirl of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. His long-held fantasy had been realized, but there was also a nagging sense of unease, a feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Thaddius left shortly after, with promises to stay in touch. As Remington and Cordelia lay in bed, discussing the evening's events in hushed, excited tones, neither could have predicted how this first encounter would set the stage for the tragedy to come. They had opened Pandora's box, and there would be no closing it again. Encouraged by the success of their first foray into cuckolding, they eagerly arranged more meetings with Thaddius. What had started as a monthly indulgence quickly became then weekly. Each encounter seemed to push the boundaries further, with Thaddius staying longer, the sessions growing more intense and intimate. Remington's role began to evolve as well. Cordelia said in an interview that he was initially content to watch from afar. He found himself drawn closer to the action. Sometimes he would join in, and that the dynamics of power and control within their bedroom became increasingly complex. Outside of their encounters, Thaddius began to integrate more into their lives. He would join them for dinner, accompany Cordelia to art exhibitions, even spend weekends at their home. His charm and wit made him a delightful companion, and the Harlows found themselves enjoying his company even when action wasn't on the agenda. As spring turned to summer, Remington's initial excitement began to give way to a gnawing sense of discomfort. He started to notice small but significant changes in Cordelia's behavior. She seemed distracted during their alone time, her mind elsewhere. She began to dress up more often, even on days when they had no plans with Thaddius. One evening, Remington came home early from work to find Cordelia on the phone, speaking in hushed, intimate tones. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call, claiming it was just a client. But Remington couldn't shake the feeling that she had been talking to Thaddius. In bed, Cordelia's passion seemed to have cooled. She was still enthusiastic during their encounters with Thaddius, but alone with Remington, she often seemed tired or disinterested. Remington found himself initiating sex more often, only to be gently rebuffed. Remington tried to reassert control over the situation. He suggested taking a break from their arrangement, perhaps going on a vacation, just the two of them. But Cordelia seemed reluctant, always finding reasons to delay or change the subject. His work began to suffer as he spent hours analyzing every interaction, every text message, every glance between Cordelia and Thaddius. He started checking Cordelia's phone when she wasn't looking, scrutinizing her social media activity, even contemplating following her when she went out alone. Remington knew he was spiraling, but he felt powerless to stop it. The game he had initiated was slipping out of his control, and he was terrified of losing Cordelia. As his anxiety grew, so did his determination to put an end to the situation he had created, by any means necessary. The breaking point came on a warm July evening. Remington had planned a romantic dinner at home, hoping to reconnect with Cordelia and discuss his growing concerns. He had left work early, bought her favorite wine, and spent hours preparing an elaborate meal. But as the sun began to set and the candles burned low, Cordelia was nowhere to be seen. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours ticked by, the carefully prepared food growing cold on the table. When she finally stumbled in shortly before midnight, her hair disheveled and lipstick smudged, Remington's worst fears seemed confirmed. The argument that ensued was explosive. Remington, his emotions amplified by alcohol and hours of anxious waiting, unleashed all the fears and suspicions he'd been harboring. He accused Cordelia of falling in love with Thaddius, of making a fool of him, of destroying their marriage. Cordelia, caught off guard and defensive, initially tried to deflect. She claimed she'd lost track of time at a client meeting, that her phone had died. But faced with Remington's relentless questioning and the evidence of her appearance, she finally broke down and admitted she had been with Thaddius. The confession hit Remington like a physical blow. He had suspected, had feared, but hearing it confirmed shattered something inside him. In that moment, all the excitement and thrill of their arrangement went away. Cordelia, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain. She loved Remington, she insisted, but Thaddius made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She was confused, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her deepening emotions for Thaddius. Remington, his voice low and dangerous, demanded that she end things with Thaddius immediately. Cordelia, her own anger rising, refused. This had been Remington's idea in the first place, she argued. He couldn't dictate her feelings or control her relationships. The argument escalated, with both of them saying hurtful things they would later regret. Remington, in a moment of rage, smashed a wine glass against the wall. Cordelia, shocked by this uncharacteristic display of violence, retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind her. Remington spent the night on the couch, his mind racing, unable to sleep. In the days following their confrontation, a chilling calm settled over the Harlow household. Cordelia and Remington moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking, the tension palpable. Cordelia spent most of her time out of the house, throwing herself into her work, and Remington suspected meeting with Thaddius. Remington, for his part, retreated into a dark place within himself. He called in sick to work, spending his days in a haze of alcohol and paranoid thoughts. He scoured Cordelia's computer and phone for evidence of her relationship with Thaddius, meticulously documenting every text, every call, every unexplained absence. Remington began to fantasize about confronting Thaddius, about making him pay for destroying his marriage. At first, these were just harmless daydreams, a way to vent his frustration. But as the days wore on and Cordelia grew more distant, these fantasies took on a darker, more violent tone. One afternoon, while Cordelia was at a client meeting, Remington found himself in their garage holding the heavy wrench he used for home repairs. As he felt its weight in his hand, a chilling thought crossed his mind. It should be so easy to end this, and to eliminate the threat to his marriage once and for all. Horrified by the direction of his thoughts, Remington dropped the wrench and fled the garage. But the seed had been planted. As he paced the house, gulping down glasses of whiskey, the idea took root and grew. By the time night fell, what had started as a fleeting, horrifying thought had crystallized into a plan. August 15th dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Remington woke early, his head pounding from another night of heavy drinking, but his resolve unwavering. Today would be the day he confronted Thaddius, the day he reclaimed control over his life and his marriage. He spent the morning in a feverish state of preparation. He showered, shaved, and dressed with meticulous care, as if preparing for an important business meeting rather than the violent confrontation he was planning. In the garage, he selected the wrench he had held days earlier, wrapping it in a towel and placing it in a nondescript gym bag. Cordelia left for work around 9 a.m., barely acknowledging Remington as she rushed out the door. As soon as she was gone, Remington got into his car and drove to Thaddius's gallery. He parked across the street, watching as Thaddius arrived, greeting his employees with his characteristic charm. For hours, Remington sat in his car. As closing time approached, Remington watched Thaddius bid goodbye to his last customer and begin closing up the gallery. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With shaking hands, he grabbed the gym bag and crossed the street. Thaddius was locking the gallery door when Remington approached. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a wary smile. "Remington," he said, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Remington felt a surge of rage at Thaddius's casual tone, as if he hadn't been destroying Remington's life for months. Without conscious thought, he swung the gym bag, catching Thaddius off guard and sending him stumbling back against the gallery door. What followed was a blur of violence and desperation. Remington pulled out the wrench, swinging it wildly as Thaddius tried to defend himself. But Remington was beyond reason. Every blow was fueled by months of jealousy, insecurity, and rage. When it was over, Remington stood panting over Thaddius's motionless body, the wrench slick with blood in his trembling hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just killed a man. He had just destroyed his own life in a futile attempt to save it. Remington went through the motions of covering his tracks. He dragged Thaddius's body into the alley behind the gallery, hiding it behind a dumpster. He wiped down the door handle and any surfaces he might have touched. Then, still in a state of shock, he drove home, the weight of his actions settling over him like a shroud. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Remington pulled into his driveway, the rain washing away the blood on his hands, but doing nothing to cleanse his conscience. The hours following the murder passed in a nightmarish blur for Remington. He stumbled into the house, barely making it to the bathroom before violently emptying the contents of his stomach. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of his actions hit him. He had killed a man. He was a murderer. Operating on autopilot, Remington set about destroying evidence. He burned his clothes in the backyard fire pit, scrubbed the car clean, and took a shower. When Cordelia came home, Remington had composed himself enough to feign normalcy. He greeted her with forced cheerfulness, suggesting they order takeout and watch a movie. As they sat on the couch, the TV flickering unwatched, Remington's mind raced. He knew it was only a matter of time before Thaddius's body was discovered. He needed an alibi, a story to tell when the inevitable questions came. He casually mentioned to Cordelia that he had spent the day at home catching up on work and doing some yard work. He even showed her a small cut on his hand, claiming he had nicked himself while pruning the rose bushes, a cut that had actually come from his struggle with Thaddius. 2 days after the murder, the news broke. Thaddius Blackwood, prominent art dealer and fixture of Portland's cultural scene, had been found dead behind his shop. The police were treating it as a homicide. Remington learned of the discovery while at work, overhearing colleagues discussing the shocking news. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands shaking so badly he had to excuse himself to the restroom. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Eliana Rossi, a veteran of the Police Bureau's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She and her team combed through Thaddius's life, interviewing friends, family, and business associates. It didn't take long for them to uncover Thaddius's relationship with the Harlows. Cordelia, devastated by the news of Thaddius's death, initially tried to downplay their connection, but faced with evidence from Thaddius's phone records and witness accounts, she eventually admitted to their affair. When the police came to interview Remington, he was prepared. He expressed shock and sadness at Thaddius's death, acknowledging that while their arrangement had been unconventional, he had considered Thaddius a friend. He calmly recounted his movements on the day of the murder, his story aligning perfectly with what he had told Cordelia. Detective Rossi, however, sensed something off about Remington's demeanor. His calm seemed forced, his grief a touch too performative. She made a mental note to dig deeper into his background and movements. As the investigation progressed, the police began to piece together a timeline of Thaddius's last day. Security footage from nearby businesses showed him entering the gallery in the morning but never leaving. His last phone call had been to Cordelia, ending abruptly around closing time. The net was slowly closing around Remington. As the days turned into weeks, Cordelia's grief over Thaddius's death deepened. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the office, avoiding the stilted silences that now characterized her home life with Remington. At first, Remington's attentiveness in the wake of the tragedy had touched her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, always ready with a comforting word or a shoulder to cry on. But as time passed, she began to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. Cordelia found herself revisiting the events leading up to Thaddius's death. She remembered Remington's jealousy, his desperate pleas for her to end the affair. The more she thought about it, the more a terrible suspicion began to take root in her mind. She started paying closer attention to Remington's actions, noting when he left the house, checking his browser history when he wasn't around. She even considered hiring a private investigator, but couldn't bring herself to take that final step. As her suspicions grew, so did her fear. If Remington was capable of what she was beginning to suspect, what else might he be capable of? For the first time in their marriage, Cordelia found herself afraid of her husband, unsure of the man she had promised to love for better or worse. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A homeless man, known to frequent the alley behind Thaddius's gallery, came forward with information. He claimed to have seen a man matching Remington's description entering the alley on the night of the murder, carrying a gym bag. This new lead energized the investigation. Detective Rossi and her team began to scrutinize Remington's movements more closely. They discovered traffic camera footage that contradicted his alibi, showing his car near the gallery around the time of the murder. As the evidence mounted, Remington's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily, snapping at colleagues, and becoming paranoid about being followed. Cordelia, her own suspicions now seeming confirmed, began to distance herself from him, staying with a friend under the guise of needing space to grieve. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the police, armed with a search warrant, found small traces of blood in Remington's car that matched Thaddius's DNA. They also discovered the murder weapon, the blood-stained wrench that Remington had hidden in the attic, unable to bring himself to dispose of it completely. On a rainy September morning, nearly a month after Thaddius's death, Detective Rossi arrived at the Harlow residence with a team of officers. They found Remington sitting in the living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. As the detective read him his rights, Remington offered no resistance. In that moment, he felt an odd sense of relief. The game was over. The lies, the fear, the constant vigilance. It could all stop now. Remington Harlow's trial was brief but sensational. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, his confession a rambling account of jealousy, fantasy, and fatal obsession. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Cordelia, shattered by the revelation of her husband's actions, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She sold their house, unable to live with the memories it held, and moved out of state to start a new life. On the morning of September 15, 2019, the body of Sydney Watkins, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher, was discovered in her modest two-bedroom home. The scene was gruesome, with clear signs of a struggle and multiple stab wounds marring Sydney's body. As detectives combed through the evidence, a chilling story began to emerge, one of a divorce gone wrong, a custody battle spiraling out of control, and a father driven to the unthinkable. At the center of this tragedy was Zenaia Thornton, the 8-year-old daughter of Sydney Watkins and Mark Thornton. Zenaia, a bright and vivacious child, had become the unwitting prize in a tug-of-war between her parents. What started as a mutual decision to end an unhappy marriage had devolved into a bitter feud, with both parties fighting tooth and nail for primary custody of their only child. Mark Thornton was born on July 12, 1982, in Hartford, Connecticut, the only child of Robert and Linda Thornton. From an early age, Mark showed signs of a driven and competitive nature, excelling in both academics and sports. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic childhood lay a darker reality. Robert Thornton was a strict disciplinarian with a volatile temper, often subjecting young Mark to harsh punishments for minor infractions. Linda, though loving, was passive in the face of her husband's outbursts, leaving Mark to navigate a household where success was demanded and failure was met with anger. As Mark grew older, he internalized his father's perfectionist tendencies and explosive temper. He developed a persona of confidence and charm, but those close to him noted an underlying insecurity and a need for control. Sydney Watkins came from a starkly different background. Born on March 3, 1984, in New Haven, Connecticut, she was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit, working-class family. Her father, James, was a carpenter, and her mother, Mary, worked part-time as a librarian. Despite their modest means, the Watkins household was filled with love, laughter, and a strong emphasis on education and community service. Growing up, Sydney was known for her kind heart and empathetic nature. She excelled in school, particularly in subjects related to literature and social studies. Her passion for helping others led her to pursue a degree in education at Southern Connecticut State University. Sydney's gentle demeanor and patience made her a natural with children. She volunteered at local youth centers throughout college, and upon graduation, secured a position as a second-grade teacher at an elementary school. Mark and Sydney's paths crossed in the summer of 2008 at a mutual friend's wedding. Mark, then a rising star at his law firm, was immediately drawn to Sydney's warmth and authenticity, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat world he inhabited daily. Sydney, in turn, was charmed by Mark's confidence and ambition, seeing in him a drive that complemented her more laid-back nature. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance. Mark swept Sydney off her feet with grand gestures and lavish dates, while Sydney introduced Mark to the simple joys of home-cooked meals and quiet evenings spent in meaningful conversation. After a year of dating, Mark proposed during a surprise weekend getaway to Sydney's vineyard. Sydney, deeply in love and envisioning a future filled with happiness and stability, joyfully accepted. The couple wed in a lavish ceremony in the spring of 2010, with both sides of the family coming together to celebrate what everyone believed would be a long and happy union. The first few years of Mark and Sydney's marriage were, by all accounts, blissful. They purchased a charming home in Oak Ridge, settling into domestic life with enthusiasm. Mark's career continued to flourish, while Sydney found fulfillment in her teaching and in creating a warm, inviting home for the couple. However, as time passed, small cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect facade. Mark's work hours grew longer, and his stress levels increased as he pursued partnership at his firm. Sydney, while supportive, began to feel neglected and lonely. On April 17, 2011, Zenaia Thornton was born, bringing a renewed sense of joy and purpose to Mark and Sydney's lives. Mark, initially apprehensive about fatherhood given his own complicated relationship with his father, found himself utterly devoted to his daughter. He would spend hours reading to her, playing with her, and planning for her future. As Zenaia approached school age, the differences between Mark and Sydney became more pronounced. These differences led to frequent arguments, with each parent believing they knew what was best for their daughter. By the time Zenaia was 6 years old, the strain on Mark and Sydney's marriage had reached a breaking point. The constant arguments, lack of emotional intimacy, and fundamental disagreements about parenting had eroded the love that once bound them together. The divorce proceedings began in January 2018, and what started as an amicable separation quickly turned contentious. Mark, feeling betrayed and fearing the loss of control over his family, hired Gregory Patel, a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney. Sydney, overwhelmed by the sudden hostility, turned to her college friend Rachel Goldstein, a family law attorney known for her compassionate approach. The legal battle that ensued was bitter and protracted. Mark contested every aspect of the divorce, from the division of assets to the custody arrangements. He accused Sydney of being an unfit mother, citing her lack of ambition and permissive parenting style as reasons why he should have primary custody of Zenaia. Sydney, in turn, presented evidence of Mark's controlling behavior and volatile temper, arguing that his parenting style was detrimental to Zenaia's emotional well-being. The proceedings dragged on for months, draining both parties financially and emotionally. After nearly a year of legal wrangling, the court finally issued its ruling in November 2018. Taking into account Zenaia's age, her established routine, and the testimonies of various experts, the judge awarded joint legal custody to both parents. However, Sydney was granted primary physical custody, with Mark receiving generous visitation rights, including every other weekend and one weeknight dinner. This arrangement, while seemingly fair, left Mark feeling defeated and resentful. He viewed the decision as a personal failure and a threat to his relationship with Zenaia. Unbeknownst to Sydney or the court, this custody ruling would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy. In the months following the divorce settlement, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic and hostile. He began to obsessively document every interaction with Sydney, looking for any perceived misstep or violation of the custody agreement. His communications with her, once civil if tense, devolved into a barrage of accusatory emails and text messages. Mark's visitations with Zenaia became a source of constant conflict. He would return her late, change plans at the last minute, or attempt to schedule extra time without consulting Sydney. During handovers, he would often make snide remarks about Sydney's parenting, or try to manipulate Zenaia into saying she wanted to spend more time with him. At work, Mark's performance began to suffer as he focused more and more on finding ways to regain control over his family situation. Colleagues noticed his shortened temper and distracted demeanor, with some expressing concern about his mental state. Mark's boss, noticing the decline in his work quality, suggested he take some time off to sort out his personal issues. This only served to fuel Mark's paranoia, convincing him that everyone was conspiring against him. Sydney, deeply concerned about the impact of Mark's behavior on Zenaia, did her best to shield their daughter from the growing tension. She maintained a calm demeanor during handovers, redirected Zenaia's attention when Mark made inappropriate comments, and tried to ensure that Zendaia's time with her father remained positive. Privately, Sydney sought advice from her attorney and Zendaia's pediatrician on how to handle the situation. She began keeping a detailed log of Mark's behavior, documenting late returns, inappropriate comments, and any signs of emotional distress in Zenaia following visits with her father. Sydney also enrolled Zenaia in play therapy sessions with child psychologist Dr. Lisa Martinez, hoping to provide Zenaia with a safe space to process her feelings about the divorce and her father's changing behavior. Despite her efforts to keep things amicable for Zendaia's sake, Sydney found herself increasingly fearful of Mark's unpredictable moods. She installed a security system in their home and informed Zendaia's school about the situation, requesting that they not release Zenaia to Mark outside of his designated pickup times. Sydney also reached out to her brother Michael, asking him to be present during handovers when possible, hoping that a witness might temper Mark's hostility. As the conflict between her parents escalated, Zendaia's sunny disposition began to dim. Once outgoing and confident, she became withdrawn at school, often sitting alone at lunch or refusing to participate in group activities. Her teacher noticed a decline in Zendaia's academic performance and an increase in anxiety-related behaviors, such as nail-biting and hair-twirling. At home with Sydney, Zenaia became clingy and prone to emotional outbursts. She would often wake up with nightmares, calling out for both her parents. Sydney would find her daughter in tears, confused and upset by the conflicting loyalties she felt. Zendaia's play therapy sessions revealed a child torn between love for both parents and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. In early August 2019, Mark filed a motion for modification of the custody agreement, seeking primary physical custody of Zenaia. His petition cited Sydney's alleged parental alienation and claimed that Zenaia was flourishing under his care while regressing when with her mother. Sydney, armed with documentation of Mark's erratic behavior and reports from Zendaia's therapist, filed a counter-motion requesting supervised visitation for Mark. The court scheduled a hearing for September 20th, giving both parties just over a month to prepare their cases. This impending legal showdown ratcheted up the tension between Mark and Sydney to unprecedented levels. Mark became obsessed with winning the case, viewing it as his last chance to assert control over his family. Sydney, meanwhile, grew increasingly anxious about the possibility of losing custody of Zenaia, fearing for her daughter's emotional well-being if placed primarily in Mark's care. As the hearing date approached, Mark's grip on reality began to slip. He stopped showing up to work, using all his time to build his case against Sydney. His apartment became a chaotic mess of legal documents, photos of Zenaia, and scribbled notes detailing perceived slights and conspiracy theories. Mark's few remaining friends tried to reach out, concerned by his disheveled appearance and rambling phone calls, but he pushed them away, accusing them of siding with Sydney. Mark's paranoia reached new heights. He became convinced that Sydney was poisoning Zenaia against him and that the entire legal system was corrupt. He started following Sydney and Zenaia, taking photos of their activities and interpreting innocent interactions as evidence of Sydney's unfitness as a mother. In his distorted thinking, Mark began to see himself as Zendaia's savior, the only one who could protect her from Sydney's harmful influence. During this time, Mark's interactions with Zenaia became increasingly disturbing. He would interrogate her about Sydney's activities, make disparaging comments about her mother, and fill her head with promises of a better life once he won custody. Zenaia, confused and frightened by her father's intensity, began to resist visits, clinging to Sydney and begging not to go with Mark. 3 days before the scheduled custody hearing, Mark reached his breaking point. After a particularly difficult handover where Zenaia cried and refused to go with him, Mark became convinced that Sydney had turned his daughter against him completely. In his delusional state, he concluded that the upcoming hearing was rigged, that he would never receive a fair judgment, and that Sydney would always find a way to keep Zenaia from him. It was at this moment, alone in his cluttered apartment surrounded by the detritus of his obsession, that Mark made the fateful decision to take matters into his own hands. In his twisted logic, he reasoned that the only way to ensure he would have custody of Zenaia was to eliminate Sydney from the equation entirely. With cold determination, Mark began to plan the unthinkable, the murder of his ex-wife. In the early hours of September 15, 2019, Mark set his plan into motion. He had spent the previous 2 days meticulously preparing, his legal mind perversely applied to the task of committing and concealing a murder. He chose a Sunday, knowing Sydney would be home alone while Zenaia was at a sleepover with her maternal grandparents. Mark packed a bag containing a hunting knife he had purchased with cash at a sporting goods store 2 towns over. He also included rope, duct tape, and cleaning supplies, having researched methods to eliminate evidence. To establish an alibi, Mark had set up his home computer to make online purchases and send emails throughout the night and morning. He had also left his cell phone at home, connected to the Wi-Fi to create a digital footprint, suggesting he never left his apartment. At 4:30 a.m., Mark left his apartment, careful to avoid security cameras and potential witnesses. He drove a rental car, paid for with a prepaid credit card, to a spot a few blocks from Sydney's house. From there, he proceeded on foot, his heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. Mark arrived at Sydney's house just before dawn. Using a copy of the house key he had secretly made during a previous visit, he silently entered. The house was quiet, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Mark crept up the stairs, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. He paused outside Sydney's bedroom. He pushed open the door to find Sydney still asleep. The sound roused her and she sat up, confusion quickly turning to terror as she recognized Mark's figure in the dim light. "Sydney, what are you doing to my daughter?" Mark's voice was low and menacing. Sydney scrambled out of bed, her voice shaking as she tried to reason with him. But Mark was beyond reason. He lunged forward, grabbing Sydney's arm as she attempted to run past him. She fought back fiercely. They struggled, crashing into furniture and knocking items off shelves. Sydney managed to break free momentarily. Running towards the hallway, Mark pursued her, his face contorted with rage. In the hallway, he caught up to her, tackling her to the ground. Sydney continued to fight, scratching and kicking, leaving defensive wounds that would later become crucial evidence. In a frenzy of violence, Mark brought the knife down repeatedly. Sydney's screams were cut short as the blade found its mark. Again and again, the hallway walls, once adorned with happy family photos, were now splattered with blood. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. Mark stood over Sydney's lifeless body, his rage giving way to shock as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. The knife slipped from his blood-soaked hands, clattering to the floor. He rushed to retrieve his bag of supplies, frantically trying to clean up the worst of the blood. In his haste and shock, Mark made critical mistakes. He missed several blood spatters, left partial fingerprints, and failed to notice that in the struggle, Sydney had managed to grab of his hair. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Mark gathered his things and fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would ultimately lead to his downfall. At 8:30 a.m., Karen Mitchell, Sydney's close friend and fellow teacher, arrived at the house. They had plans to carpool to a teachers' conference that morning. When Sydney didn't answer the door, Karen used the spare key she knew was hidden under a flower pot. The moment Karen stepped inside, she knew something was terribly wrong. The house was eerily quiet, and there was a faint coppery smell in the air. She called out. As she climbed the stairs, she noticed smears on the wall that made her heart race. Karen's scream pierced the quiet Sunday morning when she discovered Sydney's body in the upstairs hallway. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. "I think my friend has been murdered," she sobbed to the operator. "Oh God, there's so much blood." Within minutes, the peaceful suburban street was transformed into a chaotic crime scene. Police cars and ambulances crowded the driveway, their lights flashing silently in the morning sun. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching in shock as police tape went up around Sydney's home. The nightmare had only just begun. Detective Lisa Hawkins of the police department took charge of the investigation. With 15 years of experience in homicide cases, she immediately recognized the signs of a crime of passion. The brutality of the attack, the lack of forced entry, and the personal nature of the crime all pointed to someone close to the victim. As the forensics team combed through the house, collecting blood samples, fingerprints, and other trace evidence. Detective Hawkins began interviewing neighbors and friends. Karen Mitchell's statement about Sydney's contentious relationship with her ex-husband quickly made Mark Thornton the primary suspect. The investigation moved rapidly. A search warrant was obtained for Mark's apartment, where detectives found a disturbing shrine to Zenaia and Sydney, walls covered with photos and legal documents. Mark's computer revealed his obsessive research into custody laws and, more damning, methods of committing untraceable murder. Meanwhile, the forensics team made crucial discoveries at the crime scene. Despite Mark's attempts to clean up, they found his DNA under Sydney's fingernails and matched the hair Sydney had grabbed to Mark's genetic profile. Partial fingerprints found in the house were also consistent with Mark's. As the evidence mounted, Detective Hawkins knew they needed to move quickly. Mark Thornton had become not just a suspect, but a potentially dangerous fugitive who might attempt to reach his daughter. Unaware that he was already the prime suspect, Mark attempted to establish his alibi. He returned to his apartment, showered, and meticulously cleaned his clothes and shoes. He then made several calls, including one to Sydney's phone, leaving a message asking about picking up Zenaia later that day. Mark then went to a local coffee shop, making sure to be seen by the staff and engaging in conversation with other patrons. He even called the police himself later that afternoon, expressing concern that he couldn't reach Sydney. However, Mark's careful planning began to unravel almost immediately. A neighbor had noticed the unfamiliar rental car parked near Sydney's house in the early morning hours. The car rental company confirmed that Mark had rented the vehicle using a prepaid card, a detail he had overlooked in his haste to remove the car from the scene. The trial of Mark Thornton began 6 months after Sydney's murder. The prosecution presented a compelling case built on both forensic evidence and a disturbing psychological profile of the defendant. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence found at the crime scene, including the hairs matched to Mark and the blood spatter patterns consistent with the prosecution's account of the murder. The rental car evidence was also presented, along with security camera footage, showing a figure matching Mark's description near Sydney's house on the morning of the crime. Detective Hawkins took the stand, detailing the investigation and the mounting evidence that led to Mark's arrest. She presented Mark's computer searches in the shrine found in his apartment, painting a picture of a man obsessed and spiraling out of control. A parade of witnesses took the stand, each adding to the portrait of a tragedy years in the making. Zendaia's teachers testified about the child's increasing anxiety and behavioral issues, which they attributed to the high-conflict divorce. Sydney's friends and colleagues spoke of her fear of Mark and her efforts to protect Zenaia from the escalating tension. Mark's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a loving father, driven to desperation by a biased court system and a vindictive ex-wife. They suggested that Sydney had been the one alienating Zenaia from her father, causing Mark's mental state to deteriorate. The defense also tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, suggesting that the crime scene had been contaminated and that the DNA evidence was inconclusive. They presented character witnesses who spoke of Mark's previous reputation as a dedicated father and successful lawyer. However, their efforts were largely overshadowed by the mountain of evidence against Mark and his own erratic behavior during the trial. After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, broken only by a muffled sob from Mark's mother. Mark, given the opportunity to speak, showed little remorse. In a rambling statement, he continued to blame Sydney and the court system for his actions, claiming he had only wanted to protect his daughter. The judge delivered a scathing rebuke before announcing the sentence. "Mr. Thornton, your actions have not only taken a life but have irrevocably damaged your daughter, the very person you claimed to be protecting. You have displayed a shocking lack of empathy and an inability to put your child's needs before your own desires." She then sentenced Mark Thornton to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. In the years following the trial, Zenaia Thornton remained in the care of her maternal grandparents. With ongoing therapy and support, she slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing both parents in such a tragic manner. The case led to reforms in the family court system, with increased resources allocated for mental health evaluations and support services for high-conflict divorces. Sydney Watkins' memory lived on through a foundation established in her name, dedicated to supporting children affected by domestic violence. As for Mark Thornton, He spends his days in a maximum security prison, his attempts at appeal repeatedly denied, forever marked as the man who destroyed his family in a misguided attempt to keep it together. On October 15, 2021, police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come: the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher, lying in a pool of his own blood. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout his apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noted Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "I thought it was just shyness at first, but as she got older I noticed how possessive she could be of the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text incessantly when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd show up wherever she thought I might be. At the time, I thought it was just because she cared so much." Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was here that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. "She was brilliant at it," Sarah said, "but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping." After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting." By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh." From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. "Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from the university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always so balanced," she said. "He valued his independence, but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, Ethan came back from that hike on cloud 9. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they'd talked for hours without a lull in the conversation. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of southern area. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together, and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late, Jessica recalled. It seemed odd, given that she knew most of us and had even joined us a few times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. For that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. But I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined." As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support her claims. She would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch. But colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room, as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Ethan's student Emma Chen later testified to a disturbing encounter. "Ms. Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive." Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried, that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," she said. But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities. As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waving to out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to call it a night, his elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras. In the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras. Save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss, but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute. Even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation, he knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wary. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia, even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor with multiple stab wounds marking his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda, in particular, struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The recovered surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy. One early autumn morning, the lifeless body of Melissa Porter was discovered in her car, parked on a secluded road just outside town. Melissa, a local kindergarten teacher beloved by many, had gone missing 2 days prior, leaving behind a worried husband and a community in shock. James Porter, Melissa's husband, was the first to report her missing. James, a mild-mannered accountant, had been frantic with worry, his anxiety evident in the tremor of his voice when he spoke to the police. The discovery of Melissa's body turned his worst fears into a nightmarish reality. Alongside James, Two other men, Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, soon came under the scrutiny of the investigation. Both had been intimately involved with Melissa, each harboring deep and complex feelings for her. Detective Sarah Davis, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind and an unyielding determination for justice, was assigned to the case. As she delved into Melissa's life and the relationships that entwined her with James, Michael, and Joe, it became clear that beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals. The story of Melissa Porter's demise was not just a tale of a tragic death, but of a tangled web of love, deceit, and vengeance. It was a crisp morning when Officer Tom Harris received a call about an abandoned vehicle on the outskirts of Oakwood. As he approached the scene, the sight of Melissa Porter's car sent a chill down his spine. The car was parked haphazardly, one wheel on the gravel shoulder, the other on the grassy verge. The windows were fogged, and the faintest hint of a foul odor wafted through the air. Harris peered through the driver's window and recoiled. Melissa Porter was slumped over the steering wheel. Her skin was pallid, and a faint trickle of blood had dried on her temple. The immediate cause of death was not apparent, but the scene suggested foul play. The small community of Oakwood buzzed with shock and sorrow as news of the discovery spread. Melissa had been missing for 48 hours, and her friends and family had clung to hope that she would return unharmed. Now that hope was cruelly dashed. James Porter was inconsolable, his grief magnified by the public scrutiny he now faced. He had been the one to report Melissa missing, and now he was thrust into the center of a murder investigation. Detective Sarah Davis arrived at the scene, her expression grim. She meticulously inspected the car and the surrounding area, noting the lack of defensive wounds on Melissa's body and the absence of a struggle. This suggested she might have been unconscious or incapacitated before her death. A preliminary examination revealed traces of a powdery substance on the passenger seat, which would later be identified as a potent sedative. Davis ordered the car to be towed to the forensic lab for a thorough examination and instructed her team to canvass the area for witnesses. The investigation had just begun, but the pressure to find answers was immense. The community wanted justice for Melissa, and the police were determined to provide it. The Oakwood Police Department quickly mobilized to investigate Melissa Porter's death. Detective Davis spearheaded the effort, her no-nonsense attitude setting the tone for the team. The first order of business was to question James Porter, whose proximity to the victim made him an initial person of interest. James was brought in for questioning at the station. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Detective Davis began with routine questions about his relationship with Melissa, their recent activities, and his whereabouts during the time she was missing. James explained that he and Melissa had been married for 5 years, a seemingly happy couple in the eyes of the community. He recounted the night Melissa disappeared. She had left the house around 7 p.m., claiming she needed to run some errands. When she didn't return, he grew worried and called the police the next morning. Davis noted his demeanor, searching for signs of deception. James provided an alibi, stating he was home watching TV that night. He offered to let the police verify his story with their home security system's footage. Davis made a mental note to follow up on this lead. As the interview progressed, another name surfaced: Michael Reynolds. According to James, Michael was a close friend of Melissa's, someone she had known for years. James admitted he had always felt a bit uneasy about their relationship, but had no concrete reason to suspect anything untoward. Detective Davis decided to pay Michael a visit. Michael Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with an air of easy confidence, welcomed the detectives into his home. He seemed genuinely distraught upon hearing of Melissa's death, insisting they had been just friends. However, his nervous fidgeting suggested there might be more to the story. The investigation widened to include Joe Clark, a local artist who had been seen with Melissa on numerous occasions. Joe, in his mid-40s, was known for his brooding temperament and reclusive lifestyle. He was less forthcoming than Michael, evading direct questions and offering vague, cryptic responses. Detective Davis sensed that both Michael and Joe were hiding something. The threads of Melissa's life began to unravel, revealing a woman who was far more complex and enigmatic than anyone had realized. With each interview, the investigation grew more convoluted, and the stakes became higher. The truth about Melissa's death was buried beneath layers of secrets, and it was up to Davis to dig them out. Melissa Porter was born and raised in Oakwood, a town she loved and never wanted to leave. She was known for her warm smile and her ability to connect with people, traits that made her an excellent kindergarten teacher. Her marriage to James was seen as a match made in heaven, though those closest to her knew there was more beneath the surface. Melissa met James at a charity event 5 years ago. James, an accountant with a stable job and a kind heart, seemed like the perfect partner. They married within a year, and for a while their life together appeared idyllic. But over time, Melissa began to feel restless. The routine of married life left her yearning for something more. Enter Michael Reynolds. Michael and Melissa had been friends since high school. Their bond had always been strong, and there were times when their friendship seemed to border on something deeper. Michael, a charming and successful entrepreneur, offered Melissa the excitement and passion she felt was missing from her marriage. Their relationship, while initially platonic, soon evolved into a secret affair. Melissa found herself torn between the security James provided and the thrill she experienced with Michael. Her feelings for Michael were intense, but they also brought complications and guilt. Then there was Joe Clark. Joe was a local artist, known for his moody paintings and reclusive nature. Melissa met Joe at an art exhibition a year before her death. Joe was different from both James and Michael. He was mysterious and brooding, qualities that fascinated Melissa. Their connection was immediate, and it wasn't long before Melissa found herself involved with Joe as well. Melissa's relationships with Michael and Joe were known only to a few close friends, and she took great pains to keep them hidden from James. However, managing these affairs became increasingly difficult, and Melissa's life grew more complicated. She loved each of these men in different ways, and each offered her something unique. But she also knew that this web of love and deceit could not last forever. As Detective Davis delved deeper into Melissa's background, she discovered a woman who was passionate and vibrant but also deeply conflicted. Melissa's need for connection and excitement had led her down a dangerous path, one that ultimately ended in her untimely death. With Melissa's body discovered and her secret life beginning to surface, suspicion naturally fell on James Porter. Detective Davis scrutinized his alibi, seeking any inconsistencies that might indicate his involvement in his wife's death. James's alibi rested on his claim that he was at home the night Melissa disappeared, watching TV and later falling asleep on the couch. The home security footage confirmed that James had not left the house during the critical hours. However, Davis was not entirely convinced. She knew that alibis could be fabricated or manipulated. The state of the Porters' marriage became a focal point of the investigation. Friends and neighbors painted a picture of a couple that appeared happy, but had their share of issues. Financial records showed that the Porters were struggling with debt, a potential motive for James to want his wife out of the picture. Life insurance policies on Melissa further added to the suspicion, though the amounts were not exorbitant. James's demeanor during questioning was another point of concern. While his grief seemed genuine, there were moments when his responses were too measured, too controlled. Davis wondered if he was hiding something, or simply trying to protect himself from being wrongfully accused. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between James and Melissa in the days leading up to her disappearance. The messages revealed growing tension between them, with Melissa expressing dissatisfaction and James responding with frustration. The arguments, though not overtly violent, indicated a marriage under significant strain. James's interactions with Michael and Joe also raised red flags. Both men admitted to having confrontations with James, who had become increasingly suspicious of their relationships with Melissa. James denied any knowledge of Melissa's affairs, but his anger towards the men was palpable. As the investigation progressed, James Porter remained a prime suspect. His potential motives, financial gain, marital discord, and jealousy, provided enough cause for Detective Davis to keep a close watch on him. However, without concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime, the case against him remained circumstantial. Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, the two men who had shared intimate relationships with Melissa, were next on Detective Davis's list. Each had their own reasons for wanting Melissa in their lives, and potentially reasons for wanting her gone. Michael Reynolds, with his charismatic demeanor and successful career, seemed an unlikely suspect at first glance. He had been Melissa's confidant for years, their bond evolving into a romantic relationship that brought both joy and complications. Michael's feelings for Melissa were genuine, but his frustration with her indecision and the secrecy of their affair had caused tension. During questioning, Michael admitted to feeling hurt and betrayed when he discovered Melissa's involvement with Joe, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. Joe Clark was a different story. Known for his brooding personality and artistic temperament, Joe had always been somewhat of an enigma. His relationship with Melissa was intense and passionate, but also fraught with jealousy and possessiveness. Joe's art often reflected his tumultuous emotions, and his interactions with Melissa had been no exception. During his interview, Joe was evasive, his answers tinged with bitterness. He expressed deep sorrow over Melissa's death, but also a lingering resentment towards her for being unable to fully commit to him. Davis noted the contrasts between Michael and Joe. One a polished, successful businessman, the other a moody, introspective artist. Both had motives driven by love and jealousy, and both had been deeply affected by Melissa's actions. The detective also discovered that Michael and Joe had confronted each other on several occasions, their arguments escalating as Melissa's relationships with them became more entangled. The investigation into Michael and Joe's backgrounds revealed more layers to Melissa's story. Each man had been drawn to Melissa's vivacious personality and warmth, but both had also experienced the darker sides of their relationships with her. The complexity of these relationships suggested that Melissa's death was not a straightforward case of jealousy or revenge, but rather a culmination of many conflicting emotions and desires. As Detective Davis continued to unravel the intricacies of Melissa's life and relationships, she realized that the truth was buried deep within a web of passion, betrayal, and hidden motives. The challenge was to untangle these threads and find the one that would lead to Melissa's killer. As Detective Davis dug deeper into the lives of Melissa, James, Michael, and Joe, she began to uncover a series of startling revelations and secrets that painted a clearer picture of Melissa's complex world. The first major revelation came from Melissa's close friend, Laura Mitchell. Laura revealed that Melissa had been confiding in her for months about the struggles in her marriage and the turmoil caused by her relationships with Michael and Joe. Melissa had been feeling increasingly trapped and overwhelmed by the dual pressures of maintaining her marriage and managing her affairs. Laura also mentioned that Melissa had expressed fears about someone stalking her, though she never specified who. This new information prompted Davis to re-examine the evidence with fresh eyes. The possibility of a third-party involvement, someone who knew about Melissa's affairs and had a vested interest in her demise, became a compelling angle. Davis ordered a deeper investigation into Melissa's communications and social media, looking for any signs of threats or suspicious activity. The forensic analysis of Melissa's car provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Traces of the sedative found in the passenger seat matched a prescription registered to Joe Clark. When confronted with this evidence, Joe's calm facade began to crack. He admitted to having the sedative, but claimed he had no intention of harming Melissa. According to Joe, Melissa had asked him for the sedative to help her sleep, a claim that was difficult to verify. Further complicating the investigation was a discovery in Michael's financial records. Large sums of money had been transferred between Michael's accounts and an unknown third party over the past few months. Michael explained that these were business transactions, but the lack of clear documentation raised suspicion. Davis wondered if Michael might have been involved in some form of blackmail or had hired someone to intimidate Melissa. The pressure on all three men intensified as Davis continued to piece together Melissa's last days. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed that Melissa had been planning to leave Oakwood, possibly to escape the tangled relationships she had found herself in. She had been seen packing boxes into her car and had mentioned to a colleague that she needed a fresh start. Then came the biggest revelation of all, a hidden journal found in Melissa's belongings. The journal contained detailed accounts of her relationships with James, Michael, and Joe, as well as her fears and plans for the future. Melissa wrote about feeling suffocated by James's controlling nature, exhilarated by her affair with Michael, and deeply conflicted about her intense connection with Joe. She also mentioned receiving anonymous threats, which she suspected were from someone who knew about her affairs. The journal painted a picture of a woman caught in a web of her own making, desperate to break free but unsure how. It provided Detective Davis with critical insights into Melissa's state of mind and the potential motives of those around her. With this new evidence, Davis felt she was finally closing in on the truth. Just as Detective Davis thought she was getting closer to solving the case, a surprising twist emerged that shifted the focus of the investigation. A new piece of evidence surfaced. A security camera recording from a nearby convenience store that showed Melissa in the company of a man who was neither James, Michael, nor Joe on the night she disappeared. The man in the footage was identified as Daniel Harper, a former colleague of Melissa's from a previous job in a neighboring town. Harper had a checkered past, including a history of violent behavior and a restraining order filed against him by a former girlfriend. The discovery of his involvement with Melissa added a new layer of complexity to the case. Davis brought Harper in for questioning. Harper, a wiry man with a nervous energy, initially denied having seen Melissa recently. However, when confronted with the video evidence, he changed his story. He admitted to meeting Melissa that night, but claimed they had only talked. According to Harper, Melissa had reached out to him because she felt threatened and needed someone to confide in. She had asked Harper to meet her away from Oakwood to avoid being seen by anyone who might know her. Harper's account seemed plausible, but Davis was wary. Harper had a motive: his unrequited feelings for Melissa and his jealousy over her relationships with other men. His past behavior suggested he could be capable of violence, especially if he felt rejected or betrayed. Davis decided to dig deeper into Harper's background and his interactions with Melissa. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Harper's car revealed traces of the same sedative found in Melissa's vehicle. This new evidence linked Harper directly to the scene of the crime, making him a prime suspect. Harper's story began to unravel under the weight of mounting evidence. He confessed that he had given Melissa the sedative, but insisted it was for her own protection, claiming she had asked for it to calm her nerves. Detective Davis knew that Harper's involvement complicated the narrative, but she also suspected there was more to the story. Harper's account of events didn't entirely align with the evidence. Davis hypothesized that Harper might have been manipulated by someone else, possibly Michael or Joe, to carry out the crime. The idea of a larger conspiracy began to take shape. As Davis continued to press Harper for details, he revealed a startling detail. He had been receiving anonymous payments over the past few months, just like Michael. Harper claimed he didn't know who was behind the payments, but admitted they were meant to ensure his silence about his meetings with Melissa. This revelation pointed to a coordinated effort to keep Melissa's secrets hidden. Davis realized that the investigation had taken a dark turn, one that involved not just a crime of passion, but a calculated plan to silence Melissa permanently. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, and Davis was determined to uncover the mastermind behind the plot. The investigation took a sinister turn as Detective Davis unraveled the web of deception surrounding Melissa's death. The revelation of anonymous payments and Harper's involvement hinted at a larger, more nefarious plot. Davis now had to consider the possibility that Melissa's death was not just a crime of passion, but a premeditated murder orchestrated by someone with a hidden agenda. Davis's team focused on tracing the source of the payments. Financial records showed a series of transactions funneled through a shell company, eventually leading to an offshore account. The intricate financial trail suggested a high level of planning and resourcefulness, characteristics not typically associated with crimes of passion. This new lead pointed towards someone with significant financial acumen and the means to cover their tracks, potentially Michael Reynolds, given his business background. Davis revisited Michael, armed with the new evidence. Under intense questioning, Michael's confident facade began to crack. He admitted to transferring money to Harper, but insisted it was to help Melissa, not harm her. He claimed Melissa had confided in him about her fears and asked him to arrange for protection, but he had no idea Harper would misuse the funds. Davis was not convinced by Michael's explanation. She suspected that Michael, feeling cornered by Melissa's indecision and the threat of their affair being exposed, had orchestrated a plan to remove her from the equation. However, Michael alone could not have executed such a complex scheme. The involvement of Joe Clark, with his volatile emotions and connection to Melissa, seemed likely. Confronting Joe, Davis presented the evidence of the sedative and the financial transactions. Joe, already unstable, broke down under the pressure. He confessed to being manipulated by Michael, who had convinced him that Melissa was planning to leave both of them and expose their affairs. In a desperate bid to prevent this, Joe agreed to Michael's plan to sedate Melissa and make her disappear. The dark truth emerged. Michael had orchestrated the entire plot, using Joe and Harper as pawns to carry out his plan. Michael's motive was not just jealousy, but a calculated decision to eliminate Melissa and protect his reputation and business interests. Joe, driven by his emotional turmoil, had been an unwitting accomplice, and Harper, lured by money, had played his part without fully understanding the consequences. Davis's investigation had uncovered a chilling conspiracy that highlighted the lengths people would go to protect their secrets and desires. The case was far more complex and darker than anyone had initially imagined, revealing the depths of human deceit and treachery. With the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, Detective Davis moved swiftly to secure arrest warrants for Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark. The evidence against them was overwhelming: financial transactions, confessions, and the forensic link between the sedative and Joe. Davis coordinated with her team to ensure that the arrests were conducted smoothly and without incident. Joe Clark was the first to be apprehended. He was found at his studio, surrounded by his hauntingly dark paintings. The arresting officers found him in a state of disarray, his guilt and regret evident. Joe offered no resistance, murmuring apologies and asking about Melissa's final moments. His remorse was genuine, but it could not absolve him of his role in the crime. Michael Reynolds proved more challenging. He had anticipated the arrest and attempted to flee. However, a coordinated effort by the Oakwood Police Department ensured he was apprehended at a private airstrip, trying to board a chartered plane. His arrest was marked by defiance and indignation, maintaining his innocence and accusing the police of fabricating evidence. With both suspects in custody, the prosecution began to build a robust case. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Oakwood's history, drawing intense media attention. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, journalists, and those who had known Melissa. The prosecution presented a compelling narrative of manipulation, betrayal, and murder, while the defense tried to paint Michael as a victim of circumstance and Joe as a man driven to desperation. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the extensive evidence and emotional testimonies. Ultimately, both Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and second-degree murder. Michael received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Joe, whose genuine remorse and cooperation were considered, was given a reduced sentence of 25 years. Daniel Harper, whose role was more peripheral, was charged with accessory to murder and received a lesser sentence of 10 years. His involvement, though significant, was viewed as being coerced by the primary conspirators. In the end, Oakwood returned to its peaceful existence, but the memory of Melissa Porter and the lessons learned from her case would never be forgotten. Her story remained a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth and justice. Emily Parker was born and raised in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Ann Parker, were well-respected members of the community. Richard owned a local hardware store, while Ann was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother, Jack, and a younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of her parents' eyes. From an early age, Emily exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Emily pursued her dream by attending Ohio State University, where she earned her degree in education. After college, Emily returned to Maplewood and secured a teaching position at the local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. David, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting, found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes's team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds's double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily. According to his findings, Emily had discovered David's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches, although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove. Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded, but Emily remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Hayes reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Sebastian Thompson, a successful businessman, and Hazel, his homemaker wife, had been married for 15 years. Their marriage, once vibrant, had been faltering, prompting them to seek professional help. They enrolled in a retreat led by the renowned Dr. David Green, a charismatic therapist with a reputation for mending fractured relationships. On the fourth night of the retreat, Sebastian was found dead in their cabin. His death, initially appearing as a tragic accident, soon revealed darker undertones. The investigation uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green, hidden from everyone but the two, was a catalyst for the events that unfolded. Dr. Green, once a beacon of hope for struggling couples, was now at the center of a murder investigation. His charming exterior masked a manipulative mind with financial motives. As the truth unraveled, it became clear that Sebastian's death was no accident, but a coldly orchestrated murder. This true crime story delves into the complex relationships, personal histories, and the sinister plot that led to Sebastian Thompson's untimely death. It examines the psychological manipulation employed by Dr. Green, the emotional turmoil of Hazel, and the meticulous investigation that brought the truth to light. This is the chilling account of a couple's therapy retreat that turned deadly, revealing the dark side of love and trust. The couple's therapy retreat was situated in a secluded, luxurious cabin in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests and picturesque views. The location was chosen to provide an escape from the daily stresses of life, offering a peaceful environment conducive to healing and introspection. As Sebastian and Hazel Thompson arrived at the retreat, they were greeted by Dr. David Green. With his warm smile and reassuring presence, he exuded confidence and empathy, instantly putting the participants at ease. Alongside Sebastian and Hazel, there were 3 other couples, each grappling with their own issues. The retreat kicked off with a group session, where each couple introduced themselves and shared their reasons for attending. Sebastian, tall and well-built, spoke with a hint of frustration in his voice. He expressed his desire to rekindle the love and trust that had diminished over the years. Hazel, petite and attractive, echoed his sentiments, though her eyes betrayed a deeper, unspoken sadness. Dr. Green facilitated the sessions with skill and sensitivity, creating an atmosphere of openness and vulnerability. He emphasized the importance of honest communication and trust, urging couples to confront their issues head-on. The initial sessions were intense, with emotions running high as old wounds were reopened. Sebastian and Hazel's interactions were Sebastianed by underlying tension. Sebastian's controlling nature clashed with Hazel's growing sense of independence. Their exchanges were fraught with resentment and unspoken accusations. Dr. Green seemed particularly attentive to their case, often singling them out for deeper analysis. In private sessions, the dynamics were different. Dr. Green focused on building rapport, carefully listening to their individual grievances. He offered Hazel a sympathetic ear, understanding her feelings of entrapment and frustration. For Sebastian, he played the role of a stern yet caring advisor, urging him to let go of his controlling tendencies. The other couples at the retreat observed the palpable tension between Sebastian and Hazel. They noticed how Dr. Green seemed to give Hazel more attention, often engaging her in deeper conversations. This did not go unnoticed by Sebastian, who began to feel a growing sense of unease. The retreat's idyllic setting provided a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The towering pines and serene lake seemed to mock the chaos within the hearts of the participants. As the days progressed, the initial hope for reconciliation gave way to a sense of impending doom. Sebastian and Hazel's relationship, instead of healing, seemed to be unraveling further. Dr. Green's presence, once a source of comfort, became a point of contention. The other couples, too, began to sense that something was amiss, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. As the retreat moved into its third day, the tension reached a boiling point. The stage was set for a tragic turn of events that would shatter the tranquil facade of the retreat and expose the dark secrets lurking beneath. Sebastian Thompson's life was a testament to hard work and ambition. Born into a middle-class family, he had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and relentless effort. By the age of 45, he had secured a high-ranking position at a prestigious firm, earning a handsome salary and enjoying the perks of success. However, his professional achievements came at a cost. The long hours and constant pressure strained his personal life, creating a rift between him and Hazel. Sebastian's control issues stemmed from his desire for perfection. He demanded the best from himself and those around him, often leading to conflicts at home. His need to control every aspect of his life extended to his marriage, where he expected Hazel to conform to his ideals. This created a suffocating environment for Hazel, who felt increasingly trapped in a role she hadn't chosen. Hazel Thompson, in contrast, had led a more sheltered life. Growing up in a small town, she had married Sebastian young and dedicated herself to being a supportive wife and homemaker. Initially, she found fulfillment in this role, but as the years passed, she began to feel a deep sense of dissatisfaction. The love and attention she once received from Sebastian had dwindled, replaced by criticism and control. Hazel's discontent grew as she watched her husband thrive in his career, while her own aspirations were stifled. She longed for freedom, for a chance to explore her own identity outside the confines of her marriage. It was during this time of vulnerability that she met Dr. David Green. Dr. Green's background was shrouded in mystery. He was a charismatic figure, known for his ability to connect with people on a deep emotional level. His reputation as a skilled therapist had earned him a loyal following, and his retreats were highly sought after. However, beneath his polished exterior lay a manipulative mind. Dr. Green had a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals for personal gain. His charm and intelligence masked a dark side that few were aware of. He had a knack for identifying those who were emotionally fragile and used their insecurities to his advantage. Financial gain was a significant motivator for him, but so was the thrill of control. Hazel's vulnerability and dissatisfaction made her an easy target for Dr. Green. He began their affair with calculated precision, offering her the attention and validation she craved. Their interactions started innocently enough, with late-night conversations and sympathetic listening. Gradually, he intensified his influence, making Hazel dependent on his approval and guidance. Dr. Green's manipulation extended beyond the affair. He subtly planted seeds of doubt and resentment in Hazel's mind, exacerbating the existing tension in her marriage. He portrayed himself as the only one who truly understood her, driving a wedge between her and Sebastian. His ultimate goal was to remove Sebastian from the equation, both to deepen his control over Hazel and to gain financially. Sebastian, unaware of the affair, sensed a shift in Hazel's behavior. She became more distant and withdrawn, often disappearing for hours without explanation. His attempts to confront her were met with defensiveness and anger, further straining their relationship. He turned to Dr. Green for guidance, unaware that the man he trusted was orchestrating his downfall. Dr. Green's plan was meticulous. He exploited the trust placed in him by both Sebastian and Hazel, using their therapy sessions to manipulate their emotions. He created scenarios that heightened the conflict between them, pushing them to the brink. His aim was to drive Sebastian to a point of desperation where he could be easily eliminated. As the retreat progressed, Dr. Green's influence over Hazel grew stronger. She became increasingly reliant on him, viewing him as her savior from a life of misery. Her perception of Sebastian shifted from a loving husband to an oppressive figure, a change fueled by Dr. Green's constant manipulation. The stage was set for a tragic culmination. Sebastian's frustration and Hazel's growing dependence on Dr. Green created a volatile mix, primed for a deadly outcome. Dr. Green, ever the puppet master, watched as his plan unfolded, confident in his ability to control the narrative. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green began subtly, almost innocently. During the early sessions, Dr. Green took a special interest in Hazel, recognizing her vulnerability. He offered her a sympathetic ear and gentle words of encouragement, which she desperately needed. Their relationship escalated during private therapy sessions. Dr. Green's office, a cozy room with soft lighting and plush furniture, became a sanctuary for Hazel. She poured out her heart, sharing her frustrations and dreams. Dr. Green listened attentively, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers, making her feel seen and understood. Late-night conversations turned into secret rendezvous. They would meet in secluded spots around the retreat, hidden from the prying eyes of other participants. Their meetings were filled with whispered confessions and stolen kisses, each encounter deepening their bond. Hazel's internal conflict was intense. She felt a growing attachment to Dr. Green, yet guilt gnawed at her conscience. She loved Sebastian, or at least she thought she did. But the connection she felt with Dr. Green was unlike anything she had experienced. He made her feel alive, appreciated, and desired. Dr. Green, on the other hand, was playing a calculated game. He knew how to manipulate Hazel's emotions, feeding her insecurities and deepening her dependence on him. His motives were far from pure. Financial gain and control drove his actions. He saw Hazel not just as a lover, but as a pawn in his grander scheme. Their affair was a dangerous dance fraught with risk. Hazel's behavior became increasingly erratic, her guilt manifesting as anxiety and paranoia. She feared discovery, not just for the affair, but for the growing realization that Dr. Green had a hold over her that she couldn't break. One evening, as they met in a secluded part of the retreat, Dr. Green's true nature began to surface. He spoke of their future together, painting a picture of a life free from Sebastian's control. Hazel, caught in his web, began to believe in the possibility of a new life. However, the cost of this new life was steep, and the shadows of doubt began to creep into her mind. Dr. Green's manipulation extended to Sebastian as well. He planted seeds of suspicion, subtly suggesting that Hazel's behavior was a reaction to Sebastian's controlling nature. He urged Sebastian to be more understanding and patient, all the while knowing that his advice would only exacerbate the tension. As the retreat progressed, the affair became more intense, the secrecy heightening the thrill and the danger. One evening, during a particularly heated session, the tension boiled over. Sebastian, feeling cornered and misunderstood, lashed out verbally. He accused Hazel of not trying, of already giving up on their marriage. Hazel, instead of responding, looked to Dr. Green for support. This small gesture was the breaking point for Sebastian. His face contorted with a mixture of hurt and rage, and he stormed out of the session. Dr. Green seized the opportunity to further manipulate Hazel. He comforted her, emphasizing how Sebastian's behavior was proof of his controlling nature. Hazel, emotionally fragile and desperate for validation, absorbed Dr. Green's words, her trust in him growing stronger. The other couples were taken aback by Sebastian's outburst. They had their own issues, but none had witnessed such a dramatic confrontation. Dr. Green addressed the group, explaining that sometimes conflicts needed to be brought to the surface to be resolved. His explanation was met with nods of understanding, though doubts lingered. Sebastian, alone and seething, wandered the retreat grounds. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Hazel, not just to the problems in their marriage, but to Dr. Green himself. His mind raced with suspicions and fears, each thought more troubling than the last. He needed to find a way to reach Hazel, to break through the barriers that seemed to be growing between them. That night in their cabin, the atmosphere was tense and heavy with unspoken words. Sebastian tried to reach out to Hazel, to apologize and explain, but she was distant, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. The silence between them was deafening, a stark contrast to the arguments that had filled the past days. Dr. Green, watching from the shadows, felt a sense of triumph. His plan was unfolding perfectly. The tension between Sebastian and Hazel was at its peak, and the stage was set for the next phase of his scheme. He knew that Sebastian was close to breaking, and all he needed was one final push. As the retreat moved into its 4th day, the sense of impending doom grew stronger. The other couples, though unaware of the full extent of the turmoil, sensed that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Green maintained his facade of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed a glint of anticipation. The stage was set for a tragic climax, one that would shatter the lives of those involved and expose the dark undercurrents that had been simmering beneath the surface. The tension, carefully cultivated by Dr. Green, was about to reach a deadly crescendo. The 4th night of the retreat was shrouded in an eerie stillness. The usual sounds of the forest seemed muted, and a heavy fog rolled in, enveloping the cabin in a ghostly embrace. Sebastian and Hazel had retired to their room after another tense day, the silence between them more oppressive than ever. Around midnight, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The other couples, jolted from their sleep, rushed out of their rooms, confusion and fear etched on their faces. The source of the scream was unmistakable. It came from Sebastian and Hazel's cabin. Dr. Green, appearing composed yet concerned, quickly took charge. He directed the others to stay back while he entered the cabin. Inside, he found Hazel, pale and trembling, standing over Sebastian's lifeless body. The room was in disarray, signs of a struggle evident. Sebastian lay on the floor, his eyes wide open in a final expression of shock and pain. There were visible bruises on his neck, and a broken lamp lay nearby, its jagged edges stained with blood. Hazel, in a state of shock, kept muttering that she didn't know what happened, that she had woken up to find him like this. Dr. Green, masking his satisfaction, wrapped his arm around Hazel, guiding her away from the scene. He assured the other participants that he would handle the situation and contacted the local authorities. Within minutes, the tranquility of the retreat was shattered by the arrival of police and paramedics. The initial investigation pointed to foul play. The signs of struggle and the nature of Sebastian's injuries indicated a violent confrontation. Hazel, as the only other person in the room, became the prime suspect. She was taken into custody for questioning, her dazed state complicating the initial interrogation. Dr. Green, playing the role of the concerned therapist, vouched for Hazel. He explained to the police that she had been under immense stress and that Sebastian had been aggressive. He painted a picture of a woman pushed to her limits, subtly suggesting that she might have acted in self-defense. The police, while not entirely convinced, took Dr. Green's statements into account. They began piecing together the events leading up to the murder. Other participants were interviewed, and it became clear that the Thompsons' relationship had been in turmoil. The tension between them, coupled with Sebastian's controlling nature, provided a potential motive. However, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Hazel's account began to emerge. She couldn't clearly remember the events of the night, her memories a foggy jumble of fear and confusion. Her emotional state was fragile, and she seemed genuinely distraught over Sebastian's death. Dr. Green continued to support Hazel, maintaining his role as her confidant and protector. He provided the police with additional details, carefully crafting a narrative that supported his version of events. He portrayed Sebastian as a domineering husband, and Hazel as a victim driven to desperation. As the police delved deeper, they uncovered the affair between Hazel and Dr. Green. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. The affair provided a potential motive for Hazel, but it also raised questions about Dr. Green's involvement. His influence over Hazel was evident, and some investigators began to suspect that he might have had a hand in the events. Dr. Green, sensing the growing suspicion, remained calm and cooperative. He deflected attention from himself, emphasizing his role as a therapist trying to help a troubled couple. His charm and professionalism worked in his favor, but the police weren't entirely convinced. The discovery of the affair shifted the focus of the investigation. Hazel, now seen as both a suspect and a victim, faced intense scrutiny. Dr. Green, while not officially a suspect, was under the radar. The stage was set for a complex and convoluted investigation, with multiple layers of deception and manipulation to unravel. As the night wore on, the sense of tragedy and confusion deepened. Sebastian's death, initially seen as a tragic accident, now appeared to be a murder driven by hidden motives and dark secrets. The serene retreat had become the scene of a chilling crime, and the truth was far from clear. The police investigation into Sebastian Thompson's death quickly intensified. Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the retreat the morning after the murder, determined to uncover the truth behind the tragic event. Detective Collins began by interviewing the other participants. Their accounts painted a picture of escalating tension between Sebastian and Hazel. Most of them mentioned Dr. Green's unusual interest in Hazel and his seemingly antagonistic stance towards Sebastian. The affair, already known to the police, became a focal point in her inquiry. In her interview with Hazel, Detective Collins noticed the woman's fragility and confusion. Hazel's account of the night was fragmented and inconsistent. She repeatedly claimed she couldn't remember what had happened, that she had woken up to find Sebastian dead. Her emotional distress seemed genuine, yet Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Hazel was involved. Dr. Green was interviewed next. He maintained his composed demeanor, offering a polished account of his interactions with Sebastian and Hazel. He admitted to the affair, describing it as a regrettable but understandable consequence of Hazel's unhappy marriage. He framed himself as a supportive figure, trying to help Hazel through her emotional turmoil. Despite his cooperative attitude, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Green was hiding something. His responses were too calculated, too perfect. She decided to delve deeper into his background, looking for any signs of past misconduct. The retreat's other participants provided further insights. Several of them mentioned the escalating arguments between Sebastian and Hazel, and a few noted that Dr. Green seemed to exacerbate these conflicts rather than resolve them. One participant, a woman named Rachel, mentioned overhearing a particularly heated argument between Sebastian and Hazel the night before the murder. Detective Collins followed up on Rachel's lead, examining the retreat's layout and the possibility of others hearing the argument. The cabin's isolated location made it unlikely that anyone outside could have heard, suggesting that Rachel might have been closer than she admitted. Collins began to consider the possibility of other witnesses or accomplices. The forensic team provided crucial evidence. The bruises on Sebastian's neck indicated strangulation, and the broken lamp suggested a violent struggle. However, there were no defensive wounds on Hazel, raising questions about her involvement in the physical altercation. The presence of an unidentified fingerprint on the lamp added another layer of mystery. As the investigation progressed, Collins discovered financial irregularities linked to Dr. Green. Large sums of money had been transferred from Hazel's account to an offshore account in Dr. Green's name. This revelation pointed to a clear financial motive, suggesting that Dr. Green had been manipulating Hazel not just emotionally, but financially as well. Armed with Hazel's partial recollection and the financial evidence, Detective Collins confronted Dr. Green. His calm facade cracked as he faced the mounting evidence. The fingerprint on the broken lamp, initially unidentified, was found to belong to Dr. Green. This evidence, combined with Hazel's testimony and the financial trail, solidified the case against him. Dr. Green's manipulative tactics had backfired, leaving a trail of evidence that pointed directly to him. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Foster, meticulously laid out the evidence against Dr. Green. They highlighted his manipulative tactics, the financial exploitation of Hazel, and the clear motive behind Sebastian's murder. Witnesses, including Hazel and other retreat participants, testified about the escalating tension and Dr. Green's undue influence. The jury, after deliberating for several hours, found Dr. Green guilty of first-degree murder and financial exploitation, and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, the truth had been uncovered, and justice had been served. The scars left behind were deep, but they were also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Hazel and the other survivors found a way to move forward, their experiences shaping a future where trust and healing could coexist. Amanda Everwood, with her chestnut hair and piercing blue eyes, was the epitome of elegance and creativity. Born into a family of artists, her childhood home was filled with the scent of oil paints and the sight of canvases in various stages of completion. Amanda had inherited her mother's talent and her father's determination, quickly making a name for herself as an exceptional landscape artist. Her works were known for their vibrant colors, and the way they captured the soul of nature. Richard Everwood, in contrast, came from a lineage of lawyers. The Everwood family was renowned for their legal prowess, with generations serving as judges, attorneys, and legal scholars. Richard was no different. He excelled in law school, graduating top of his class, and quickly climbed the ranks at one of the most prestigious law firms in Belleville. His charm, good looks, and sharp mind made him a formidable attorney and a desirable husband. Amanda and Richard met during their sophomore year of college. It was a classic case of opposites. Attracting Amanda's free-spirited nature complemented Richard's structured and disciplined approach to life. They fell in love quickly, their relationship blossoming amidst late-night study sessions, gallery openings, and summer road trips. After graduating, they married in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of Belleville. They settled into a beautiful Victorian home that Amanda adored. She transformed it into a haven filled with art, music, and love. The house had a large garden where Amanda often painted, drawing inspiration from the vibrant flowers and the changing seasons. Richard, on the other hand, was dedicated to his work, often spending long hours at the office. They had a son, Ethan, who became the center of Amanda's world. Their life seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Amanda's days were filled with painting, volunteering at the local art center, and taking care of Ethan. Richard's career continued to flourish, and he was soon made partner at his firm. They attended glamorous parties and charity events, where they were often the center of attention. However, as the years went by, Amanda noticed subtle changes in Richard. He became more distant, often coming home late and leaving early in the morning. The once warm and affectionate man she married was now cold and preoccupied. Amanda tried to ignore these changes, attributing them to the stress of his demanding job. However, the gnawing suspicion in the back of her mind grew stronger with each passing day. Carla Monroe entered their lives when Richard hired her as his personal secretary. Carla was stunning, with her dark, cascading hair, sharp features, and an aura of confidence that turned heads wherever she went. She was efficient, intelligent, and seemed to understand Richard in a way that Amanda no longer could. It wasn't long before Amanda's suspicions turned towards Carla. One evening, Amanda decided to confront Richard. She prepared a candlelit dinner, hoping to reignite the spark in their relationship and to get him to open up. As they sat across from each other at the dining table, Amanda poured her heart out, expressing her concerns and fears. Richard listened, but dismissed her worries, attributing his behavior to the pressures of his job. He assured her that there was nothing to worry about, but Amanda wasn't convinced. Determined to uncover the truth, Amanda hired a private investigator named Mark Collins. Mark was a seasoned professional with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. Over the next few weeks, he followed Richard and Carla, documenting their interactions. The evidence he gathered was damning. Late-night dinners, weekends away, and intimate encounters that left no room for doubt. Richard was having an affair with Carla. Amanda felt a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness. She couldn't understand how Richard could do this to their family. But amidst her turmoil, she also felt a strange sense of relief. At least now she knew the truth, and she could decide what to do next. Armed with the evidence, Amanda's initial devastation gave way to a steely resolve. She decided to confront Carla first, hoping to gather more information before dealing with Richard. Amanda arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a charity event that Richard's firm was sponsoring. Carla, unaware of Amanda's true intentions, agreed to meet at a chic downtown cafe. The cafe was a cozy, intimate space with soft lighting and plush seating. Amanda arrived early, choosing a secluded corner table where they could talk privately. Carla walked in a few minutes later, exuding confidence and poise. As she approached the table, Amanda felt a mixture of anger and curiosity. Carla greeted Amanda warmly and commented on how beautiful the cafe was. Amanda, hiding her true feelings, replied politely and steered the conversation towards Richard. She mentioned how Richard had been spending a lot of time at the office and asked how he was handling the workload. Carla responded that Richard was incredibly dedicated and that the cases he was working on required a lot of his time and attention. Amanda then leaned in and, in a low voice, told Carla that she knew about the affair. Carla's face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Amanda stopped her, saying she wasn't there to accuse or blame her. Amanda just wanted to understand why it happened. Carla, with tears in her eyes, explained that it started a few years ago when Richard was going through a rough patch at work. They began spending more time together, and one thing led to another. As Carla spoke, Amanda felt a strange sense of empathy. She could see the pain in Carla's eyes, a reflection of her own turmoil. By the end of the conversation, they had formed an unexpected connection. Amanda was captivated by Carla's intelligence and charisma, while Carla found solace in Amanda's understanding and compassion. In the weeks that followed, Amanda and Carla continued to meet in secret. What had started as a confrontation evolved into a complex relationship. Their meetings became more frequent, and their bond deepened. One evening, Carla invited Amanda to her apartment, ostensibly to review some documents related to the charity event. The apartment was a stylish modern space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. As they sat on the couch, sipping wine and talking, the tension between them grew palpable. Carla set her glass down and looked into Amanda's eyes, saying that she had developed feelings for her. Amanda's heart raced. She had felt the same way, but had been too afraid to admit it. She confessed that she felt the same way. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, and that night, they crossed the line from emotional connection to physical intimacy. The affair was intense, a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. Amanda felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, but she was also plagued by guilt and fear. They would meet in secluded spots around the city, hidden corners of parks, out-of-the-way cafes, and Carla's apartment, where they felt free from the prying eyes of the world. Their conversations ranged from deep, philosophical discussions to light-hearted banter. They shared their hopes, dreams, and fears, forming a bond that went beyond physical attraction. However, Amanda was acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. She knew that if Richard found out, the consequences would be dire. Despite this, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. Carla had become an essential part of her life, filling a void that she hadn't realized existed. Richard's suspicions grew as he noticed Amanda's changed behavior. She was more distant, often lost in thought, and seemed to have a newfound sense of confidence. Richard's paranoia led him to install a hidden camera in Carla's apartment, suspecting that Amanda might have discovered his affair and was plotting against him. When Richard reviewed the footage and saw his wife with Carla, his rage and sense of betrayal reached a boiling point. He felt emasculated and humiliated, convinced that both women had conspired against him. Richard began to meticulously plan his revenge, determined to regain control over his life. One stormy night, Richard invited Amanda to his office under the pretense of wanting to discuss their relationship and find a way forward. Amanda, hopeful for reconciliation, agreed. As she entered Richard's dimly lit office, she was struck by the coldness in his eyes. Richard told Amanda to sit down, his voice devoid of emotion. Amanda took a seat, her heart pounding. She started to speak, but Richard cut her off, slamming a folder of photographs on the desk. He said he knew everything and knew about her and Carla. Amanda's eyes widened in shock as she looked at the incriminating photos. She pleaded with Richard to let her explain, but he was beyond reason. He lunged at Amanda, his hands closing around her throat. Amanda struggled, clawing at his hands, but Richard's grip was unrelenting. Her vision darkened, and within moments she was gone. Richard stood over Amanda's lifeless body, his mind a whirlwind of rage and confusion. He knew he had to act quickly to cover his tracks. He staged the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, ransacking the office and scattering papers everywhere. He then drove to Carla's apartment, his anger boiling over. Carla was startled to see Richard at her door. She asked what he was doing there, her voice trembling. Richard pushed past her, his eyes wild with fury. He accused her of ruining everything and seducing his wife, destroying his family. Carla backed away, fear gripping her heart, and begged Richard to listen to her and understand that it wasn't like that. But Richard was beyond listening. He lunged at Carla, but she managed to evade him, grabbing a heavy vase and smashing it over his head. Richard staggered, momentarily disoriented. Carla seized the opportunity and fled. Running into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back, she ran through the rain-soaked streets, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She had to get as far away from Richard as possible. She knew that if he caught her, he would kill her. Carla reached the outskirts of town and found an old abandoned cabin. She slipped inside, her body trembling with adrenaline and terror. The next morning, Ethan Everwood found himself without a mother and soon without a father. Richard, attempting to cover his tracks, reported Amanda missing and fabricated an alibi for himself. However, the police quickly uncovered inconsistencies in his story. Amanda's body was discovered in Richard's office, and forensic evidence, along with Richard's erratic behavior, pointed to his guilt. He was arrested and later convicted of Amanda's murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Carla, meanwhile, had vanished without a trace. Her car was found abandoned at a rest stop, miles away from Belleville. There were rumors that she had fled the country, but no concrete evidence ever emerged. Some speculated she had started a new life under an assumed identity. Carla's disappearance puzzled many. Growing up in a household marked by religious fervor and violence, Carla had endured years of suppression and fear. Fleeing wasn't just an escape, it was a lifeline to freedom. She feared the repercussions of being discovered by her family, knowing all too well the horrors they could unleash upon her, driving her to vanish without a trace, leaving behind a life of oppression for one of uncertain liberty. Ethan, now orphaned, was taken in by Amanda's sister Lydia, who raised him with love and care. The Everwood home, once filled with laughter and love, stood silent, a stark reminder of the tragic events that had unfolded. Lydia did her best to create a stable environment for Ethan, but the shadow of his parents' tragedy loomed large over his childhood. She often wondered what kind of man Ethan would grow up to be, carrying the weight of such a dark legacy. Carla's escape was not without difficulty. She knew she had to leave Belleville and disappear completely. She had some cash saved up and used it to buy a bus ticket to the nearest big city. From there, she moved from place to place, using different names and taking on various odd jobs to survive. Her once confident and poised demeanor was replaced by constant anxiety and fear of being recognized. Carla found temporary solace in small towns, where she could blend into the background. She dyed her hair, changed her appearance, and avoided making close connections with anyone. Each time she felt someone might recognize her, she moved on. Her life became a series of temporary stays and fleeting moments of peace. She missed Amanda deeply, and often dreamed about their time together, the passion they shared and the plans they had made. In a small coastal town far from Belleville, Carla finally found a semblance of stability. She took on a job at a local diner, working long hours and keeping to herself. The town was quiet, and the people were friendly but respectful of her privacy. For the first time in months, Carla began to relax and let her guard down a little. She rented a small, modest apartment and tried to rebuild her life, though the fear of being discovered never entirely left her. Ethan, now a teenager, struggled with the burden of his family's dark history. He was a quiet, introspective boy, often lost in thought. Lydia did her best to provide a loving home, but Ethan couldn't escape the whispers and stares from those who knew about his parents. School was a challenge, with classmates either avoiding him or bullying him for his father's crime. Ethan found solace in books and spent hours at the local library, immersing himself in stories far removed from his reality. Lydia encouraged Ethan to pursue his interests, hoping to provide him with a positive outlet. He developed a passion for writing, pouring his emotions and experiences into his stories. His teachers noticed his talent and encouraged him to pursue a career in literature. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found hope in the future he could create for himself. One day, while browsing through old family photo albums, Ethan came across a photograph of his parents during happier times. They looked so in love, so full of life. He wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Determined to understand, Ethan began to dig deeper into his family's history. He read old newspaper articles, interviewed people who had known his parents, and pieced together the story of their lives. Ethan's investigation led him to discover the affair between his father and Carla. He was shocked and saddened by the betrayal, but he also felt a strange connection to Carla. He wondered what had happened to her after that fateful night. His search for answers led him to contact Mark Collins, the private investigator Amanda had hired. Mark, now retired, was hesitant to reopen old wounds but was moved by Ethan's determination. Mark shared with Ethan the details of his investigation, the evidence he had gathered, and the events that had transpired. Ethan learned about the confrontation between his mother and Carla, their subsequent affair, and the night his mother was murdered. Ethan felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep need for closure. Determined to find Carla, Ethan followed the trail she had left behind. He visited the places she had stayed, talked to people who had encountered her, and slowly pieced together her journey. The trail eventually led him to the small coastal town where Carla was now living. Carla was working her usual shift at the diner when Ethan walked in. She didn't recognize him at first, but as he approached her, she saw a familiar sadness in his eyes. Ethan introduced himself, explaining that he was Amanda and Richard's son. Carla was stunned and filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She invited Ethan to sit down, and they began to talk. Ethan told Carla about his life, his struggles, and his search for answers. Carla, in turn, shared her story, her escape, and her attempts to rebuild her life. They talked for hours, sharing their pain and their memories of Amanda. Carla revealed how deeply she had loved Amanda, and how the affair had been a source of both joy and torment. Ethan asked Carla about the night his mother was murdered. Carla recounted the events, her voice trembling with emotion. She told him how Richard had confronted her, his rage and violence, and her desperate escape. Ethan listened intently, feeling a mix of anger towards his father and compassion for Carla. Ethan decided to stay in the coastal town for a while, to get to know Carla better, and to find some closure for himself. They spent a lot of time together, talking about Amanda, sharing stories, and helping each other heal. Carla found comfort in Ethan's presence, and Ethan felt a sense of connection and understanding that he had never felt before. As time went on, Ethan and Carla's relationship grew stronger. They became a support system for each other, helping to heal the wounds of the past. Ethan continued to write, inspired by the stories Carla had shared and the strength he saw in her. Carla found a new sense of purpose, helping Ethan and finding a way to move forward with her life. Years passed, and Ethan published his first novel, a fictionalized account of his family's story. The book received critical acclaim, and Ethan was praised for his emotional depth and storytelling ability. He dedicated the book to his mother, Amanda, and to Carla, who had shown him the importance of understanding and forgiveness. Carla, meanwhile, continued to live in the coastal town, finding peace and stability. She stayed in touch with Ethan, visiting him often and watching him grow into a successful writer. She found solace in the fact that she had been able to help Ethan find closure and that they had both found a way to move forward. The Everwood murders became a notorious case in Belleville, a cautionary tale of deceit, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of hidden passions. Amanda's art gained a lot of fame, her landscapes now imbued with a haunting beauty that drew admirers from afar. Richard's name, once respected, became synonymous with tragedy and madness. Years later, the town still whispered about Carla Monroe, the enigmatic secretary who disappeared into the night. Her fate remained one of Belleville's greatest mysteries, a lingering shadow over the tragic tale of the Everwood family. Ethan grew up carrying the weight of his parents' legacy, determined to forge a different path and break free from the cycle of betrayal and violence. In the end, the story of the Everwood murders served as a stark reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of secrets and lies. It was a tale that would be told for generations, a dark chapter in the history of Belleville that would never be forgotten. Ethan continued to write, his works often exploring themes of love, betrayal, and redemption. His novels resonated with readers, many of whom were unaware of the true story behind his words. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found a way to turn his pain into art, creating something beautiful from the ashes of his family's tragedy. In the end, the Everwood murders were more than just a crime. They were a story of love, loss, and the enduring power of forgiveness. The lives of those involved were forever changed, but they found a way to move forward, to find peace, and create something new from the ruins of their past.